Chapter 273. The huge floating warship was like a nimble beast, slowly rising into the sky. Countless faintly discernible, mysterious magic formations emerged on the outer wall of the ship, spurting out a huge amount of wind particles, propelling the warship to streak across the sky like a fish, plunging into the undulating black forest. The moment the warship entered the primordial forest, three tall masts on the hull glowed with fluorescent light, working together to form a translucent barrier that enveloped the entire ship. The dazzling runes on the barrier flickered, and strange energy ripples flowed irregularly on it, as if it had some special purpose. Grimm closed his eyes and sensed it. Light refraction, disguise, aura shield, spirit evasion. Light refraction and disguise were used to hide the hull, while aura shield was used to prevent the life auras of the people on the ship from leaking out and attracting unnecessary trouble. Spirit evasion was a spell that could make small life forms that were too close to the warship unconsciously avoid the airspace it was in, preventing collisions that would cause the disguise spell to fail. Unfortunately, these spells were only effective against low-grade life forms or low-ranked magical beasts, and had no effect on the powerful magical beasts in the primordial forest. Of course, there were other strange runes on the translucent barrier, but Grimm's knowledge of runes was limited, and he couldn't identify them one by one. Standing at the edge of the ship and looking down, he saw a reflective silver river flowing through the black sea of trees. A flock of blue birds flew slowly beneath the floating warship. They had a fiery red crown, light blue membranous wings, and a gorgeous, long tail. From the looks of it, they were mutated rocks. These rocks might look beautiful and elegant, but they were actually carnivorous birds. They were ferocious and violent by nature, and they were extremely territorial. However, no matter how ferocious the mutated rocks were, they were just ordinary birds without any elemental abilities, and posed no threat to Magi. That was why when the floating warship streaked across the sky above them, the rocks didn't even notice it. The forest here seemed to be somewhat different. Grimm had also looked down at the vast forest that stretched for hundreds of miles in the scattered pagoda forest. It seemed that the forest was mainly green, but now that he was here, it had turned gray for some reason. It was a kind of desolate and strange color. Ever since the airship entered the Black Grove, Grimm had sensed something special. It felt as though the energy here was somewhat chaotic and tyrannical. The entire world was filled with an oppressive mood that made one want to roar violently. Perhaps this was the original appearance of the Sorcerer Continent. The airship flew silently over the horizon, not disturbing the beasts in the Black Grove below. There were many wizards on the ship, and some of them were familiar with each other. Soon, they gathered in groups of 2 or 3 and chatted happily. Some wizards who were already talkative took the opportunity to visit and make new friends. Although they would sometimes be mercilessly rejected by the other party, most of the time, wizards were still willing to exchange information and witchcraft experiences with others. Wizard Angus brought Grimm to visit some of the wizards he was familiar with. Among them, there were many powerful wizards that were famous in the Central Continent. Grimm did not object to this at all. After all, he had lived 2 lives, so he knew very well that connections were a precious resource. Sometimes, it was even more valuable than a person's personal strength. There were both men and women among the wizards they visited. Although not all the young wizards were handsome or beautiful, none of them were too ugly. Most wizards did not care too much about their appearance compared to witches, since they had been exposed to dangerous, forbidden experiments all year round. Most old wizards would more or less have some side effects. Wizard Angus brought him to visit one of the wizards. The rest of his body was still normal, but the flesh on his face had completely disappeared. Only a thin layer of wrinkled skin was left on his skull. It looked like a talking skull. Wizard Angus secretly transmitted a message to Grimm. This wizard had become like this because of a failed witchcraft experiment. If it was just a simple flesh injury, wizards had a lot of methods to restore their youth and regrow their lost flesh. However, if some witchcraft had damaged the origin of the soul, it would not be easy to recover. In comparison, these female wizards were more concerned about their appearance, body, and skin. Grimm could sense traces of witchcraft modification on their bodies and faces. Of course, only Grimm, who had the AI chip's crazy ability to collect and compare data, could analyze such minute changes in witchcraft. Most of the witches were beautiful, and their bodies were hot and voluptuous. When they chatted with the wizards, they were often the focus of attention. They did not care about the unscrupulous gazes of the wizards. Sometimes, they would even take the initiative to flirt with them. It was as if they had completely treated their bodies and beauty as a resource that could be traded. This was especially true for newly advanced wizards like Grimm, who had a tall and sturdy body and was brimming with heroic spirit. He had become their target. Some hot gazes, explicit words, and debauchery were unbearable for Grimm. He already knew that, after becoming a wizard, many people did not care much about the laws and customs of the secular world. They were more willing to openly show their temperament and indulge their own desires. However, such free and open love between men and women was still hard for Grimm to accept. Behind him, Alice was like a shadow. She pouted and looked angrily at the seductive witches who deliberately chose to get close to Grimm. She kept muttering to herself. Since her voice was too soft, the people around could not hear what she was muttering. Although Alice was arrogant, her talent was indeed shocking, and she had a strong confidence in becoming a wizard. However, in front of these official wizards, she did not dare to do anything too offensive. Among the group of apprentices, she was indeed terrifyingly talented. She was an outstanding future witch with unlimited potential. However, potential was only potential. Before she could convert her potential into real strength, any setback could cause this future witch of destiny to die prematurely. In the wizard continent, there were countless examples of people who did not know how to restrain themselves and were plotted against by their enemies, resulting in their deaths. These unlucky people who died were all people with outstanding talent. Therefore, even if it was just for the sake of her own life, Alice did not have the guts to directly provoke a group of fearsome witches. However, for some reason, when she saw a group of seductive witches, whether pure, noble, or slutty, using their seductive magic on Grimm, the anger in Alice's heart kept surging. A group of shameless old women. They only know how to shake their breasts to seduce men all day long. They were simply a disgrace to the witches. They deserved to be the vassals of the wizards. Sensing the undercurrent surging behind him, Grimm forced a smile and said goodbye to Wizard Angus. He then brought Alice, who could not stop muttering, back to the cabin. In the next few days, Grimm almost never stepped out of his room. He spent day and night researching on how to fuse these foreign runes into the magic puppet crystal core. When he was tired from researching, he would meditate instead of sleep to quickly recover his spiritual force. In his body, the energy of the flame demon's heart that could explode twice a minute had gradually become acceptable. However, along with the flame energy, there was a faint, almost undetectable aura of the abyss. If Grimm did not have the AI chip that could monitor the cells in his body, he might not even be able to sense the existence of this aura of the abyss. Of course, he would not be able to sense that it was slowly but surely eroding and transforming his body. In just a dozen days, some of his organs had already shown signs of being demonized. This news was both good and bad for him. The good thing was that his body had become even stronger. Ever since he had transplanted this rank 2 flame demon's heart, the growth of his body had almost surpassed the growth of his spiritual force. He even had the intention to change his profession to become a physique wizard. His strong body and illusory, demonic aura gave Grimm a different kind of charm. However, the disadvantages were also obvious. Once his organs were demonized beyond his control, his origin faction would probably deviate from the path of a magus and would have to lean towards the demons in the lower realms. On one hand, he coveted the increase in strength brought by the aura of the abyss. On the other hand, he was afraid that he would degenerate into an abyssal creature, so he ordered the AI chip to closely monitor every change in his body. On the 5th day after boarding the ship, when one of his organs had been demonized past 11%, Grimm took out a potion from his storage belt and swallowed it without hesitation. The moment the purplish-black and sticky potion entered his esophagus, a pungent stench filled the room. From his mouth to his stomach, an indescribably strange feeling spread, gradually spreading throughout his entire body. In reality, Grimm raised his hands and watched as strands of dark red smoke seeped out of his skin, slowly dissolving into the air. Since he knew that the flame demon's heart could harm him, Grimm had naturally prepared a potion that could slowly and continuously remove the aura of the abyss from his body. Of course, Grimm could not refine these potions, but he had traded a fist-sized sapphire for them from Felicia. Every time he drank the potion, he had to carefully control the amount of the potion so that it could remove the aura of the abyss without causing his body to deteriorate. The most direct consequence of this was that he had become a stinky person. Chapter 274. Ever since the floating warship had ventured tens of thousands of kilometers into the dark forest, it had never stopped suffering attacks. Fortunately, the Silver Alliance had chosen a flight path that had been explored through countless bloody voyages over thousands of years. They had tried their best to avoid the living and hunting areas of the high-level magical creatures. Therefore, although there were many attacks, most of them were Class 1 magical creatures that lived in groups. The number of Class 2 creatures that appeared could be counted on one hand. With the floating warship's sturdy defensive barrier, the many magi on the ship joined forces and successfully repelled the magical creatures' attacks. The floating warship flew thousands of meters in the air. If ordinary magical creatures did not have the ability to fly, they would not be able to stop them. As they passed by a huge black canyon, Grimm saw a terrifying Class 2 hill giant crawling out of the ground. His towering body was at least 30 meters tall, and he looked like a moving human-shaped hill. Hill giants were a branch of the earth elemental giants. They were born with thick skin and boundless strength, and their entire body was made up of huge gray rocks. Like the dragons, they were born to sleep. Every time they had their fill, they would find an area with dense earth elemental energy and burrow into the ground to sleep. The reason the floating warship chose to pass through the territory of the hill giant was because it could not fly and would spend most of the year sleeping underground, so it would not be easy to provoke it. However, their luck was not good this time. The hill giant had just woken up. Sensing the dense scent of human flesh in the air, the hill giant slowly crawled out from the depths of the Black Canyon. It raised its huge humanoid head and opened its pitch-black mouth, roaring angrily at the floating warship. All magical creatures in the dark forest had a strong sense of territory. Once they sensed an outsider invading their lair, they would immediately attack without a second thought. Therefore, the hill giant took heavy steps that shook the earth, creating a flat path in the forest as it chased closely below the floating warship. Every time it got close, the hill giant would roar angrily at the sky. Its huge palm leaf stone hand would raise its head, and the yellowish-brown earth elemental energy would condense into a huge rock in the blink of an eye. With a loud roar, the huge rock in the hill giant's hand tumbled, whistling through the air as it rushed into the sky. The magi on the ship were looking down, and when they saw a huge rock the size of a house flying towards them, all of them turned pale with fright. Even Grimm's heart tightened, his eyes fixed on the huge rock that was tumbling towards them as he quickly analyzed the data. Beep. Main composition: earth elemental energy and impurities. Rock density: 173 cubic meters. Rock size: 3 cubic meters. Rock weight: 5.24 tons. Estimated flying height: 729 meters. What is the floating warship's current altitude? Beep. Warship of current altitude? After obtaining the detailed data from the AI chip, Grimm completely set aside his worries and focused all his attention on the data of the hill giant's body. Most of these high-grade monsters had powerful energy in their bodies and would form a defensive force field similar to a barrier. The AI chip could not pry into their information from so far away. Hill giant, rank 2. High-grade earth elemental creature. Height: 31 to 33 meters. Width: 8 to 10 meters. Weight, 97 tons. Hill giant grade 2. High-level Earth-type creature. Height 31 to 33 meters. Width 8 to 10 meters. Weight greater than 97 tons. Stats, strength greater than 27, agility less than 10, vitality greater than 25, spiritual force greater than 14. Even if it did not use its earth elemental energy, with just its terrifying weight and astounding vitality, this hill giant could easily crush a human magus of the same rank. Even if the floating warship had a rank 2 magus holding the line, if they were to face this hill giant in a one-on-one battle, they would definitely be crushed to a pulp. The rank of every creature could be used to indicate their strength, but it was not absolute. Some powerful races were born with great power bonuses, and an individual's creature rank didn't represent their full power. For example, the hill giant's huge body gave it a huge boost in strength and vitality. With the same stats, the battle strength it could display would far surpass that of a human magus of the same rank. Looking at the hill giant's stats projected by the AI chip in his mind, Grimm's shock could not be any greater. This was only a rank 2 magical creature of the Dark Forest that was slightly below average in strength. If the floating battleship wasn't flying high up in the sky, and the 60 magi on board were on flat ground, the hill giant would only need to rely on its mountain-like body to barge into the crowd unreasonably, and the magi would suffer heavy casualties. Although Grimm had gained the title of Fire Demon, he was not sure if his lava fireballs would be able to break through the defensive membrane and terrifying rock body of a moving rock mountain. In a battle with such a monster, the biggest possibility was that before Grimm could blast a rock off its body, the hill giant would have already smashed him into meat paste. The giant rock whistled through the air, and when it was exhausted, it would tumble back down. Each time, it would cause the magi to gasp in surprise. The rune formation at the tail of the floating warship suddenly glowed brightly, and under the swift and violent wind particles, it knocked away the white clouds and quickly left the territory of the hill giant. At first, the hill giant could still chase after them with large strides, but when the flying warship began to speed up, it was gradually left behind. Finally, when the floating warship disappeared into the horizon, everyone could see a terrifying rock giant climbing up a steep cliff, roaring angrily at them. After leaving the territory of the hill giant, the floating warship flew over the territory of a strange sea serpent. As the floating warship streaked across the sky above the dark forest, one of the magi suddenly pointed below and exclaimed, "Look, what's that?" Everyone bent down to take a look. In the dark forest, everything was so quiet and serene, as if there was no movement at all. However, through the intertwined branches and dense leaves, they could vaguely sense a dark shadow moving through the forest, always following below them. That's a sea serpent. A Silver Alliance magus wearing a silver magus robe explained to everyone with a smile, "It's a strange monster similar to a pollution monster. It can create strange illusions similar to a mirage, silently swallowing creatures into its body. Its basic level is also at grade 2, but it's much more terrifying than the hill giant. In the dark forest, as long as you're careful, it's not a problem to avoid the hill giant. But if you encounter a sea serpent, I'm afraid you won't even have the chance to escape." "I've also heard of this sea serpent," a tall and thin magus on the ship added. "They like to stick their bodies on the surface of the ground, and then create a clear pool of water, a beautiful garden, or a villa filled with treasures. This illusion is actually their stomach. They lure their prey in, and then unknowingly, their bodies will be dissolved by the illusion. Fortunately, they don't have long-range attacks." Finally, a magus said what everyone was thinking. All the magi nodded. Apparently, the Silver Alliance magus was not satisfied with everyone's attitude. He shook his head and said, "Everyone, don't relax so early. After passing through this sea serpent's territory, the next part of the journey will be the most challenging." "What's behind us?" a magus asked. "Winged lions." The Silver Alliance magus frowned and said, "The next monster territory we need to pass through belongs to the winged lions. "Everyone be careful." Although there were many magi on the ship, some had heard of the winged lions, while others knew nothing about them. Thus, private whispers began to sound. Some magi, who were familiar with each other, began to exchange information. Grimm was slightly taken aback. Winged lions? He seemed to have heard of this kind of monster before. It was difficult for ordinary people to distinguish between the winged lions and the griffins. Their names were similar, and both had the word lion in their names, but they were typical of two different kinds of monsters. The griffins were winged beasts with the head of an eagle and the body of a lion. This fully explained their physical characteristics. An eagle's head and sharp beak, a lion's body and sharp claws, and a pair of wide and fluffy wings. Under normal circumstances, an adult griffin was only a tier, one magical creature that lived in groups. Apart from its considerable physical strength, its greatest strength lay in its ability to fly and dive at high speeds. Its ear-piercing screeches also had a strange ability to confuse the mind. Apart from these, there was nothing else worth paying attention to. As for the winged lion, it was a magical creature that lived in groups as high as grade 2 when it matured. They usually lived together in a family. Usually, an adult male or female winged lion would bring 3 to 5 grade 1 winged lions with them. Compared to the griffins, the winged lions were a type of lion with huge wings. Apart from their strong physical strength, they also had the ability to cast light element magi. It could be said that they were the natural enemies of some dark element magi. After listening to the Silver Alliance magi's explanation, a few dark magi in black robes on the ship could not help but frown. It was obvious that they had heard of these annoying light element magi. If they really encountered such monsters later, all the curses, corrosive, and strong acid attacks, they would be useless against them. They would probably only be able to watch from the sidelines and become spectators. The floating battleship followed a tall ridge above the Black Forest, constantly changing directions, trying its best to avoid dangerous areas. Chapter 275. It was the winged lions. Under the Magi of the Silver Alliance, more than 20 Magi were already on standby, quietly awaiting the arrival of the winged lions. The Silver Alliance would use this route almost every half a month, so they knew very well what kind of species and level of magical beasts would appear in the regions they were in. Apart from a few rare cases of monsters migrating or a monster riot in the Black Forest, there was usually not much danger. However, there were exceptions to everything. This was especially true in the Black Forest, where the risks were uncontrollable. Unknown dangers were hidden everywhere. Powerful monsters usually had large territories. In this area, they were the unrivaled king and would not allow any monsters that were close to them to approach or hunt. High-level monsters had intelligence comparable to magi, and they knew how to divide their territories into inner living areas and outer hunting areas. However, there would always be areas that overlapped with each other. Hence, there would often be battles between monsters in the Black Forest. The reason why the airship knew that this was the territory of the winged lions was simple. 100 miles to the left was the territory of a large group of two-legged wyverns. Although this group of twin-legged flying dragons were only Tier 1 low-level magical beasts and were not as strong as the winged lions, they had the advantage of numbers. Moreover, they were a semi-dragon species with thick skin and flesh, great strength, and all of them could fly. Hence, after weighing the pros and cons, the winged lions were still slightly weaker. The airship began to slow down, and only when it reached a certain speed did it maintain a constant speed as it weaved through the clouds, flying along the ridge of the mountain. After the airship slowed down, most of the energy it saved was transferred to the outer protective barrier, which increased the thickness of the barrier. Flying monsters like the winged lions were extremely fast, and it would be a joke to rely on speed to shake them off. It was safer to fight and escape at the same time. Grimm was assigned to the front of the left side of the airship. Behind him, there was a magus standing at a distance of 5 steps, waiting for the winged lions to arrive. Their job was simple. When the winged lions tried to attack the barrier, they would use their best spells to counterattack. With their strength, it would be difficult for them to injure the winged lions. However, Their main goal was to exhaust their strength and force them to retreat. Grimm was wondering why the Wizards of the Silver Alliance didn't organize some powerful wizards to get rid of the winged lions since they weren't that strong. That way, the route would be safer. The AI chip quickly provided an answer. The reason why they chose not to clear out these winged lions was for the sake of the safety of the sea route. Forcibly cleaning them could indeed make the sea route safe for a short period of time. However, it would also create a vacuum of power near the ship route. Magical beasts also had their own unique ecosystem and intelligence. Once the powerful magical beasts here disappeared, it wouldn't be long before new magical beasts migrated from other areas. Just adapting to the new magical creatures was enough to give the Silver Alliance a headache. Thus, for the sake of long-term considerations, it was wisest for the Silver Alliance to preserve these powerful monsters that could not pose too much of a threat to the sea route. In addition, once the territory of these magical beasts was fixed, the Magi in charge of the sea route would only need to prepare some countermeasures to pass through this area with minimal losses or no losses. Just as Grimm was deep in thought, lion roars sounded from below the ship, and 5 dazzling figures appeared in his field of vision. Winged lions. So these were the winged lions. Grimm looked over and saw a strange magical beast that resembled lions. The bodies of the winged lions were no different from the lions that were commonly seen in the forest, but they were much sturdier and stronger. The two ranked 2 winged lions at the front, one male and one female, were as sturdy as rhinoceroses that could fly. A pair of huge wings covered in bright silver fluffy feathers extended from their ribs. At the top of their skulls were 2 strange, spiral-shaped horns that were exceptionally eye-catching. Behind them were the 3 rank one-winged lions. They were smaller in size, but their violent and ferocious appearance showed that they were the overlords of the forest. At this moment, the floating battleship had long since withdrawn its invisibility barrier. A thick, translucent tortoise shell covered its body as it fled into the distance. The 2 adult winged lions were glowing with a dazzling silver light. They flapped their wings and drew a beautiful arc in the air, diving towards the floating battleship from the side. However, they chose to dive towards the other side of the ship, so Grimm did not attack. Instead, he turned around to see how the Magus who was parallel to him dealt with the situation. It was a Magus who came from an unknown region of the Scattered Tower Forest. He wore green leather armor and black leather pants, with a scimitar strapped to his waist and a giant bow that was as tall as his body. At this moment, the giant bow had already been pulled into a semicircle. Black light flickered on the bow, and an arrow condensed from wizard energy could be vaguely seen. He was obviously an experienced combat magus. He did not shoot the special arrow in his hand too early, but instead waited with rapt attention. When an adult winged lion swooped down, the spiral horn on its head fiercely pierced into the light membrane. After that, an endless dazzling white light gushed out from the tip of the horn, colliding and annihilating the runes on the light membrane. The light barrier began to thin and soften. Just as the spiral horn was about to pierce through, the magus made his move. A sharp sound rang out. The black magus arrow pierced through the light barrier at lightning speed and pierced into the protective force field beside the adult winged lion's wide neck. Before the winged lion could react, the magus arrow exploded. A large cloud of black fog enveloped half of its body, corroding its protective force field and making sizzling sounds. The winged lion was caught off guard and was blasted away. It flipped a few times in the air before spreading its wings and stabilizing its body. Facing the half-charred body, the adult winged lion raised its neck and let out a short roar. A blinding white light quickly enveloped its body, expelling all the foreign energy. After a while, the white light dissipated. The winged lion that had suffered a small loss had completely recovered. Even its charred feathers were as clean as new. Light restoration. Grimm licked his lips, his eyes filled with envy. The winged lion flapped its wings and circled around the airship. Its fierce lion eyes stared at the magus through the translucent light barrier. It let out a few angry roars and continued to circle around the floating airship, calmly looking for a weak point in the light barrier. Seeing the winged lions flying in the sky, Grimm's heart was burning with passion. He wanted to immediately pounce and capture one. It could fly, fight, heal itself, and it was a majestic mount. It was simply the most suitable flying mount for a magus. The strange horn on the head of the winged lions could gather light particles. It could be released to attack the enemy, or it could be used to heal itself. Its effect was not any weaker than that of a magus who specialized in healing. If he had a winged lion like this, wouldn't he have a healer with him? In the future, if he got injured in battle, he wouldn't have to pinch his nose and drink those strange, unknown potions. Obviously, Grimm was not the only one who had this thought. Almost all the Magi felt their hearts burning with anxiety when they saw such an excellent flying magical beast. However, everyone knew what they were capable of, so they wouldn't do anything unwise because of this. The Magi occupied the advantageous positions on the floating airship. Every time the winged lion tried to dive down to attack the light barrier, they would all shoot spells at it, forcing it to dodge. However, no one was stupid enough to rush out and fight to the death with a magical beast. Grimm took advantage of the moment when a small winged lion flew past him. He used the AI chip in his mind to gather information about the difference in speed between the two parties and threw a lava fireball in advance. When the small winged lion flew to a suitable position, Grimm ignited the fireball with evil intentions. A loud explosion resounded. The explosion of flames and boiling lava engulfed the small winged lion for more than 10 meters. By the time it charged out with a mournful roar, many parts of its body had already been burnt black. Sharp fragments of lava broke through the protective force field on the surface of its body and pierced into its flesh, causing a spray of blood to sprinkle down from the sky. The small winged lion's mournful cry attracted the attention of the other winged lions. As streaks of white light rolled over the small winged lion's body, the mournful injuries disappeared in an instant. It once again returned to its majestic appearance. However, the small winged lion did not dare to approach the floating airship carelessly anymore after suffering such a huge loss. It spread its wings and quickly distanced itself in the airship. Then, it continuously shot out a continuous stream of white light from the tip of its head, doing its best to attack the light barrier that prevented them from entering. This white light was obviously a very pure form of light energy, and it was very difficult to intercept it with spells. Moreover, the light particles that splashed on a light barrier would cause a light explosion from time to time, blinding all the Magi who saw the light. The blinding effect did not last for long, only about 3 to 5 seconds. However, if this blinding effect appeared in close combat between a magus and a winged lion, it was not hard to imagine the terrifying consequences. Grimm used the AI chip to gather information about the winged lions as he battled. The feedback from the AI chip proved that if he were to fight fairly with a rank 1 winged lion outside, his chances of winning would not exceed 30%. Of course, this was based on the fact that magic puppets and Balrog transformation were excluded. This also represented the chances of most Magi winning. From this data, Grimm could deeply feel the strength and terror of the dark forest's magical creatures. Without the cover of the floating airship, without the protection of the defensive spell formation, without the support of numerous magic artifacts and magic weapons, human Magi would be so weak and insignificant in front of these wild magical creatures. It was no wonder that the Magus continent's major Magus organizations were able to survive for so long. Chapter 276. The battle with the winged lions was more like a game. The two sides did not engage in a life and death struggle. The floating battleship did its best to maintain the thick defensive barrier, flying at a constant speed amidst the dazzling lights of spells. It slowly moved away from the hunting grounds of the winged lions. The adult winged lions seemed to only be training their young winged lions to fly and hunt. Although they would ferociously pounce on the defensive barrier from time to time, Most of the time, they just circled around the floating battleship, constantly roaring and threatening it. The two parties fought as they moved. The winged lions stopped their pursuit when the airship flew past a raging river. They hovered in the air, roared a few times, and finally turned around to return the way they came. It could be seen that this 10-meter-wide river was the dividing line between them and the other group of monsters. If they crossed the boundary, it would most likely incite a bloody war between the two groups of monsters. After the floating battleship broke free from the winged lions, it finally began to slowly accelerate and continued to follow a fixed route through the Black Forest. According to the Magi of the Silver Alliance, the floating battleship would soon encounter the first danger zone of this voyage, the nest of the Harpies. Truth be told, Grimm's eyes almost popped out of his head when he heard that the first boss of the danger zone was actually the weak Harpies. How is this possible? In his mind, such Harpies, which had a woman's head, but a vulture-like body, wings, and sharp claws, were like low-rank monsters that could blow up a bunch of low-rank monsters with a fireball of witchcraft. How could they be more dangerous than the winged lions and the hill giants on the sailing route? Obviously, many Magi had the same doubts as Grimm. Hence, the Magus of the Silver Alliance gave them a simple explanation about the Harpies. Yes, most of the Harpies that wizards encountered in the wild were really weak, and their birds were a mess. One of the main reasons for this was that the Harpies near the human settlements were too small. Not to mention wizards. Even ordinary mercenaries and adventurers will be able to deal with a group of around 100 Harpies as long as they were well-equipped and well-prepared. This was because most of these groups were low-level Harpies that did not possess any sorcery power. Apart from throwing stones and using their claws to grab onto wooden spears to launch a sudden dive attack, they had almost no other skills. But the Harpies also had a notable characteristic. Once the population of a colony exceeded 500, a Harpy which with the power of witchcraft would be born. Most of the feathers on their bodies had fallen off, and other than the wings on their backs and the claws on their lower limbs, which still maintained the form of vultures, their torsos and heads were becoming more and more like human females. Once the number of Harpies exceeded 1,000, a terrible witch leader would be born among the Harpy witches. She was a powerful spellcaster who was no weaker than a female human wizard, and she also had the agility of an assassin. As for the Harpies that they were about to encounter, it was a huge tribe with more than 10,000 members. As a result, the number of special witches born there had reached an astonishing number of nearly 1,000. Nearly 1,000 Harpy witches with agility and the ability to cast spells. Such a huge team was a force that could not be underestimated. Even powerful monsters like the winged lions did not dare to provoke a group of Harpy witches, otherwise they would be drowned in their saliva in minutes. So in front of them was not a group of Harpies, but a terrible Harpy kingdom. Not only did it have a monster leader with super high intelligence, but it also had a complete distribution of professions, covering the low, middle, and high levels of a small army. This also meant that they had a commander, a spellcaster, and an overwhelming number of ordinary soldiers. So every time the floating warship passed through here, it meant that it was a risk. But although the dangerous place was dangerous, as long as everyone worked together, they could still pass through smoothly. It was much better than rushing into the surrounding death zones. At this moment, the floating warship was already 100,000 miles deep into the Black Forest. In such an area, they could casually leave the fixed route and enter the territory of a certain or a group of Grade 3 monsters. With their strength, if they were to encounter a Grade 3 monster's attack, the chances of them escaping successfully was almost zero. So in the past 100 years, there had been 3 tragic incidents where the floating warship was shot down by Grade 3 monsters, and all the Magi on board were killed. Although the Silver Alliance had sent out top-level Magi to take revenge, working together to kill the Grade 3 monsters that caused trouble, the Magi who had died could only die in vain. So even though they knew that the Harpy Kingdom was not weak, in order to avoid the even more terrifying Grade 3 monsters, the Silver Alliance could only choose to travel along the borders of the Harpy Kingdom. 3 days later, Grimm's first battle after stepping onto the floating battleship broke out in an unexpected encounter. They were unlucky enough to bump into a hunting party sent by the harpies. It was a small team of less than 30 people, and most of them were ordinary harpies. There were only two mutated harpies. One was a harpy assassin, and the other was a low-grade harpy witch. These people did not know what was good for them. They were obviously weak, but they still dared to take the initiative to provoke the floating warship. As a result, the Magi killed more than half of them in a single volley. Unfortunately, the two mutated harpies managed to escape. The next afternoon, the floating warship was surrounded by an army of harpies that were rushing towards it from the sky above a canyon. The floating warship, wrapped in a thick defensive barrier, advanced with great difficulty. Outside the egg-shaped barrier, the airtight harpies circled around, their ear-piercing screams enough to shatter one's eardrums. Most of the harpies did not have elemental abilities. They flapped their gray wings, their claws tightly grasping a sharpened wooden spear, and constantly stabbed at the defensive barrier. Such a low-level attack might be useful against normal beasts, but it was not good enough to deal with a defensive spell formation. So, after nearly 1,000 harpies attacked for a long time, they only managed to cause ripples on the defensive barrier and deplete some of the ship's energy reserves. As for breaking through the defensive spell formation, there was not even a trace of it. However, among the harpies that filled the sky, there were a few mutated individuals. Most of the harpies had gray bird feathers and looked ugly and ferocious. They had more bird-like characteristics than humans. The mutated individuals had shed the bird feathers on their torsos, leaving only some bluebird feathers on their joints, armpits, and the ends of their limbs. Their exposed skin was white and exquisite, their bodies slender and slender. Their breasts were full and bulging, and their faces were strangely exquisite and perfect. However, their eyes were scarlet like blood, their fingers were sharp and curved, and below their fair and plump thighs was a pair of sharp hook-like claws. Seriously speaking, if one ignored their unsightly wings and ugly claws, these harpy witches could be considered perfect humanoid creatures. According to Grimm's knowledge, there were a few harpy witches with mixed bloodlines in the Magus Association on the East Coast who had joined the local Magi organizations. They were the mixed-blood descendants of human Magi and harpy witches. Of course, this also proved that some human Magi had an extraordinarily heavy taste. In order to drive away the harpies and prevent them from destroying the defensive spell formation of the floating battleship, the Magi stationed at the sides of the ship attacked with all their might. Streaks of colorful witchcraft exploded around the spaceship like fireworks, engulfing the harpies into the elemental vortex one after another. The blizzard that covered half of the sky was wreaking havoc among the group of harpies. The biting cold wind plaited a layer of light blue frost on the bodies of every harpy that was sucked into it. Countless harpies flapped their short gray wings with all their might, but they felt that their wings were getting heavier and heavier. Finally, the harpies let out mournful cries as they fell from the sky. Although they would regain their ability to fly in a short period of time, once they were out of the blizzard, the appearance of the blizzard still disrupted their rhythm of attack. However, the appearance of this snowstorm still disrupted the rhythm of their attack, causing the harpy team to become chaotic. Not far from Grimm, a wind elemental wizard released a large area of effect wind spell. The originally transparent and unobstructed sky suddenly became filled with danger. Invisible wind vortexes densely covered the sky. Any harpy that suddenly intruded into this area would be twisted into pieces of flesh and blood in a whirlwind that caused the sky to spin and the earth to spin, raising a putrid stench of blood mist on the spot. As for Grimm, he did not use his magic puppet, nor did he transform into a Balrog. Instead, he took out his flame scepter and acted like a proper fire elemental wizard, casting fire spells in an orderly manner. On the other hand, he kept casting spells, forcefully chanting cryptic and awkward-sounding incantations, summoning a pillar of red flames in the sky in front of him. Powerful ripples of flames spread out from the pillar of flames. Every harpy that was sucked into the pillar would be charred black and fall from the sky, even if they did not die immediately. The feathers on their bodies were burnt to a mess. Normal harpies did not have the ability to fly with their bare wings. Grim stood ramrod straight as he continued to guide the large-scale fire element spells. His eyes burned with raging flames, and from time to time, he would shoot out scorching rays with extremely strong penetrative power. Against these harpies that did not have a thick body or strong scales, using flaming sunlight rays was too extravagant. Scorching rays were more than enough. Rays of laser-like scorching rays shot out randomly. Every harpy that was pierced by the red rays would wail miserably and fall from the sky. As they fell, their bodies would also emit grayish-black ripples. If the scorching rays did not kill them in their vitals, the poison from the secret voodoo scroll would have instantly taken their lives. For a moment, feathers and flesh were scattered around the floating battleship. Chapter 277. However, just as the sorcerers were unscrupulously cleaning up the harpies besieging the floating battleship, in the depths of the harpy army, there were three delicate and beautiful figures gathered together to discuss something. It's about time. A harpy with a fiery red feather robe and a pair of breathtakingly long, snow-white legs calmly instructed. In a moment, when Natalia uses her innate ability to break the defensive spell formation, Lana, move quickly and capture as many as you can. Once you receive the signal, leave immediately. Otherwise, when the defensive spell formation closes, it will be difficult for us to rescue you. Do you understand? Understood. Understood. Beside her, two other sorcerers, who had also shed most of their bird-like features, bowed in salute. Ordinary harpy witches were usually similar to sorcerer apprentices in human society, possessing a certain elemental casting ability, but the bitter and tormented spiritual force was not enough to sublimate their spiritual source. In the harpy kingdom, only the harpy witches who had advanced in rank could readjust their bodies. When ordinary harpy witches leveled up to level 1, they would usually shed the bird feathers on their torsos, and when they leveled up to level 2, they would usually shed their iconic claws, becoming similar to human women's feet. If they were lucky enough to level up again and become a level 3 harpy, which their bodies would be no different from human witches, only their bloodline would be vastly different. Looking at the exposed forms of the 3 harpy witches, even their claws had been adjusted to become delicate and beautiful feet. This was enough to prove that they were all level 2 harpy witches and had already completed 2 body evolutions. Around the 3 level 2 harpy witches, there were hundreds of level 1 sorcerer casters quietly crowding around them. Looking at the snow-white female bodies and gorgeous faces, looking at the pair of perfectly round and firm breasts, perhaps any male would be dizzy upon seeing this. However, what was rather strange was that the huge sorcerer casters were actually all harpy witches with perky breasts and slender waists. There were no male spellcasters. Following the order of the witch leader, the witch caster group, who had been hiding among the harpies and watching from the sidelines, finally moved. Along with a series of ear-piercing screeches, beautiful and agile harpy witches flew out of the team of gray harpies like dazzling clouds. They circled around the airship while hurling a string of wind blades and lightning balls at the defensive barrier. With the intervention of this group of witches, the previously impregnable defensive light film immediately trembled violently, and the strange illusory runes became more and more frequent. The harpy witches' spellcasting abilities were relatively narrow. Usually, only the wind and lightning spells were the most common, and their attack power was even weaker, only 30 to 50 degrees. However, no matter how weak their spellcasting abilities were, they couldn't stop their numbers from reaching a terrifying 100. A series of wind blades, balls of lightning, and chains of lightning exploded on the defensive membrane, putting great pressure on the airship's defensive spell formation. Don't attack the normal birdmen. Attack the spellcasters. Hurry, hurry, hurry. The Silver Alliance wizard in charge of commanding and dispatching immediately broke out in a sweat. He roared loudly while pulling out a fireball magic wand from his waist. In an instant, 5 witchcraft fireballs were shot at the group of harpy witches. The rest of the wizards also immediately adjusted the direction of their attacks. Streams of terrifying witchcraft quickly concentrated fire, covering the sky and earth as they hit the group of spellcasters who looked different from ordinary harpies. Inside the cabin, Alice was lying by the porthole in the narrow room board. She rested her little face on her hands, looking at the colorful battle scene outside with boredom. One by one, the ugly and ferocious harpies kept pouncing on the light film, using their spears, beaks, and sharp claws to tear the translucent defensive light film. At the closest point, the harpy's disgusting face was less than 10 meters away from Alice, although there was still an indestructible light film and a thin porthole between them. Even though she was now a noble quasi-wizard, an acute quasi-wizard who had mastered spatial witchcraft, but on such a battlefield, there was still no room for her to play a role. When the battle began, all the wizard's servants, followers, and apprentices were ordered to stay in the cabin and were forbidden from going out. So now she could only lie there and watch coldly as the harpies were burned to death, electrocuted to death, or drained of water by the black light. In short, the forms of witchcraft were ever-changing, and the most direct experience that the harpies had was that the ways of their deaths were also very strange and indescribable. When the group of harpy witches appeared, Alice's eyes suddenly lit up. She pressed her face tightly against the porthole and enviously looked at the pair of full breasts that were jiggling up and down in the rapid flight. Then, she looked down at her petite body that was like that of a 7-year-old child and her white, smooth, and flat chest. Her little face instantly collapsed. Damn it, even a group of humanoid monsters are bigger than me. Bastards, you're not even human. Why do you have such big breasts? I'll draw a circle and curse you. However, just as Alice was angrily letting her imagination run wild, a slight ripple suddenly appeared in the void and attracted her attention. Spatial ripple? Why is there a spatial ripple here? Alice closed her eyes and sensed for a moment. The location where the spatial ripple appeared was not within the defensive spell formation, but outside. Didn't this mean that the one controlling the spatial changes was a harpy and not a magus on the ship? Although she was still deeply dissatisfied with Grimm, considering that she was currently relying on his protection, Alice could only use her soul force to silently call out to her nominal master. Spatial ripple? After receiving Alice's message, Grimm muttered to himself in doubt. How could spatial witchcraft be so easy to grasp? Among all the branches of witchcraft, the two branches of space and time were known as the most difficult to grasp. Under normal circumstances, if a magus did not have innate talent, they would not even have the qualifications to learn these spells. Although the flame jump that Grimm had mastered seemed somewhat similar to spatial witchcraft, it was in essence just a variant of fire witchcraft. It was completely different from spatial witchcraft, and the source of witchcraft did not belong to the same system. As for the harpy witchcraft, their innate talent was even more mediocre. Most of their awakened innate talents were concentrated in the wind and lightning element. The probability of them turning into spatial witchcraft was simply too low. Although Grimm did not really believe Alice's warning, he still considered the power of his spatial innate talent. But considering the power of his spatial innate talent, he still increased his concentration and secretly added a small witchcraft on himself. Apart from that, he did not pass on Alice's warning to the magus of the Silver Alliance. After all, even he himself was not too sure of the information, and if it was not accurate, he would become a laughing stock among the Magi. However, just as he was hesitating, there was a sudden change behind the floating battleship. Due to the large number of harpy witchcraft, most of the Magi's attention was attracted to them. Streaks of powerful witchcraft chased after their spiraling figures, exploding into balls of colorful fireworks in the sky. However, just as their attention was drawn to one side of the sky, the Grade 2 harpy called Natalia suddenly appeared outside the defensive barrier with the cover of her companions. A black spiral vortex appeared in her hands, and she fiercely pressed it against the indestructible defensive barrier. A large hole suddenly appeared in the barrier that was said to be able to block all external elemental energy, and the runic energy within was sucked away by the strange black vortex. This caused a hole to appear in the originally seamless defensive system. The Grade 2 Magus of the Silver Alliance, who was hiding in the core of the floating battleship and silently guarding the defensive spell formation, suddenly raised his head and silently sensed the hole that had suddenly appeared in the defensive barrier. The shock in his heart was simply indescribable. What happened? Did the defensive spell formation break through? Nope, everything is still running smoothly. Just as he was feeling bewildered, a strange undulation suddenly appeared on the upper deck of the floating battleship. Following the shattering of space, a crack appeared in the void, and two strange harpy witches suddenly emerged from it, appearing in front of the many human magi. Some of the magi who were reveling in the slaughter of the birdmen did not even notice the changes behind them. The two beautiful female harpy witches with light blue wings on their backs made their move. Following an ear-piercing howl, all the magi who were affected by the strange sound wave began to sway, unable to control their own bodies and spells. The two Grade 2 harpy witches relied on their nimble figures to quickly dash forward, capture, and return. In a short period of time, they had actually captured 5 human magi and thrown them into the spatial crack. Seeing this strange scene, the wizards on the ship instantly panicked. While they were trying their best to attack the mysterious enemies, they were also trying their best to avoid being caught by the birdmen. However, when faced with these Grade 2 magical creatures, no magus could escape from their soul-stirring, ear-piercing howls and swift movements. Unfortunately for Grimm, he was also in the hunting range of the two harpy witches. Suddenly, the sound of an explosion came from the void, and the forcefully opened spatial crack began to tremble under the effect of the powerful spatial sealing force. It was obvious that it could not hold for much longer. In front of the defensive light membrane, the surging rune energy had already compressed the hole opened by the harpy, which Natalia into a fist-sized ball. Once the hole disappeared, the interior of the defensive spell formation would reform, and the two harpy witches would no longer be able to escape through the spatial crack. Move faster. I can't hold on much longer. Natalia struggled to maintain the hole in her hand, screaming loudly. Inside the defensive circle, on the flying deck, the two harpy witches looked at each other and made up their minds. Let's catch one last round. With an ear-piercing scream, the two lightning-fast figures attacked separately, each pouncing on a target. Chapter 278. The harpy witch's speed was extremely fast. At this speed, it was impossible for Grimm to escape from her. Therefore, he paused for a moment, and the fire elements around him quickly surged. Perhaps in less than half a second, Grimm's elemental incarnation would be able to escape from the harpy witch's claws. Unfortunately, just as he was about to teleport away, he heard a dizzying, ear-piercing scream. Grimm staggered and lost control of his flaming body, causing him to be unable to escape in time. Before he could stabilize his mind and think of another way, the chief witch's cold little hand had already firmly grasped his body. The violent lightning power surged in and instantly paralyzed his ability to fight back. The leader of the witches grabbed Grimm's body and immediately rushed back to the shaking space crack at an even faster speed, as if she was going to rush into it with Grimm. Using this short buffer time, Grimm managed to gather his scattered thoughts. Looking at the spatial crack that was right in front of him, he raised his flame scepter with all his might and activated the small spell that he had prepared beforehand. A muffled sound was heard. The fire djinn suddenly appeared near the side of the ship. However, before it could roar to announce its arrival to the world, its flaming body was suddenly replaced by Grimm's tall body. The fire djinn strangely appeared in the hands of the chief witch and was thrown into the spatial crack together with it. Fire djinn summon. Puppet substitution spell. This was not a teleportation spell, but a flame puppet substitution spell that was completed using the spiritual beacon on the fire djinn's body. The moment before rushing into the spatial crack, The chief, which seemed to have noticed the change in the prey in her hands, but she could no longer change her speed. As she and the other bird which entered the spatial crack, the dark and deep spatial crack finally closed up quietly. At the same time, the hole in the defensive light barrier finally disappeared. The floating battleship suddenly trembled. Violent and ferocious runic energy surged out of the core area of the battleship, strengthening the isolation of the defensive spell formation by 1,000 times. It completely smoothed out the spatial wrinkles left behind by the bird shaman's escape. The birdmen outside the spaceship seemed to have received some sort of order. Amidst the mournful long howls, all the harpies were like a swarm of bees that had their nest blown up. They immediately scattered like birds and beasts, flapping their short gray wings and fleeing in all directions. For a moment, the entire sky was filled with gray figures. The mutated bird shamans were mixed in with them, making it hard to tell which ones were the ones who had launched the sneak attack. Moments later, the surroundings of the airship regained its calm, and the long-awaited sunlight shone upon everyone once more. The sorcerers looked at each other in dismay. For a moment, they were still in a state of shock. What happened just now? Everything was going so well. They were doing their best to kill the harpies that had come to their deaths. Why did a bird shaman suddenly barge into the defensive spell formation and kill? No, capture the 6 magi that were fighting alongside them. Grimm's mind trembled uncontrollably. Even the flame demon's heart that was sealed in his chest became active, causing the blood in his body to boil. With a great deal of effort, Grimm suppressed the restlessness in his body and calmed himself down. He turned his head and looked into the distance. The pitiful figures of the harpies had already disappeared into the horizon. Looking back at each other, the 6 magi on the deck of the airship were now missing, some of whom he had become familiar with in the past few days. At first, Grimm was a little suspicious about the bird shamans capturing human magi. However, the information projected by the AI chip cleared his doubts and allowed him to understand the whole story. The harpies were a rather unique race. There were only females in their group, no males. This also meant that the Harpy Kingdom was a kingdom of women with no males. Hence, if they wanted to reproduce, they had to rely on other races. The Harpies usually kept themselves to themselves. When an individual in their tribe reached the reproductive period, they would go out to hunt the males of other races and bring them back to their nest to be used as breeding partners. Although the Harpies were individually weak, their biological genes were ridiculously strong. No matter what kind of strange races they mated with, they would always give birth to pure-blooded young harpies. Of course, there were magi and scholars who held a different view. The offspring of the harpies were also mixed. However, they would directly discard all the offspring with impure bloodlines and only raise those with pure bloodlines. This was how they could maintain the purity of their tribe. According to ancient records, if a harpy which mated with a human magus, the offspring they gave birth to would have a much higher chance of becoming a magus. Hence, there were countless examples of human males being captured and used as breeding tools in the areas where the harpies resided. However, today's successful abduction of a magus was simply unheard of. All the magi on the ship could not help but look at the magus of the Silver Alliance who was in charge. Are we not going to chase them? Are we just going to let them take their comrades away? One of the magi could not help but ask angrily, "How do we chase them? Where do we go?" The magus of the Silver Alliance's expression darkened. This is the depths of the Black Forest. Any change in course could bring disaster to this ship. Do you really think we should barge into the Harpy Kingdom for those unlucky fellows? There are tens of thousands of harpies and bird witches there. All the magi fell silent. Although everyone found it hard to accept, when they thought about how they might risk their lives to save their companions, the restlessness that surged in their hearts earlier disappeared. The magus of the Silver Alliance turned to look at Grimm and nodded. "You are very lucky," he then announced in a loud voice. "The Silver Alliance will be responsible for compensating the families or organizations behind the sorcerers who were accidentally lost here just now. However, since everyone has stepped onto this ship, I'm sure you're already mentally prepared for this. We will do our best to repair the holes in the defensive spell formation and not let something like this happen a second time. The Magus of the Silver Alliance spoke a lot of encouraging words, but everyone's brows were still furrowed, losing confidence in the journey ahead. At this moment, the rarely seen Grade 2 Magus of the Silver Alliance came out of the cabin and looked at everyone coldly. I know what all of you are afraid of. I can guarantee on behalf of the Silver Alliance that what happened just now will not happen again. The Harpy Witches actually produced 2 mutated bird witches in one go, and one of them is an extremely rare space Magus. This is indeed out of our expectations. I've already modified a part of the spell formation, so it's impossible for them to launch another attack like this. So don't worry, everyone, and continue our journey. With that, the Grade 2 Magus went back into the cabin and returned to the core control room. Everyone looked at each other and could only silently accept the reality in front of them. One by one, they returned to their rooms to rest. Grim smiled faintly as he accepted Magus Angus's consolation and quietly returned to his room. After the wooden door was shut and the room was sealed with a simple spell formation, Grim's expression suddenly turned gloomy. He silently sat down at the wooden table and began to daydream. If he had been slightly weaker, or if he had not prepared that substitution spell beforehand, his ambitions would have been instantly dashed, and he would have been reduced to the miserable state of being a breeding partner for the bird witches. A large kingdom with close to 1,000 harpy witches did not need too many adult bird witches. As long as there was a 10th of them, there would be 100 bird witches waiting to breed with them. Moreover, the breeding rate of magi was not high, and there were also a species that had difficulty reproducing. If the first time was not enough, then the second time was not enough. If the second time was not enough, then the third time was not enough. Whenever Grim thought of the terrifying life of being imprisoned for breeding, he could feel the muscles on his face twitching. His mind was in a frenzy, and he just wanted to go on a killing spree. Grim knew that this was the side effect of the invasion of the Abyss aura. He did not dare to be careless, and quickly took out a few bottles from his waist pouch and swallowed them one by one. These were all potions that could stabilize the mind and suppress emotions. Although there would be some side effects if he swallowed a large amount, he could not care less about the side effects now that his mind was in a mess. Perhaps this unexpected encounter in the Harpies' territory was not an accident at all, but a surprise attack arranged by the bird witches. Therefore, after the success, the floating warship's journey was unprecedentedly smooth, and it left the Harpy Kingdom without any problems. Half a month later, the floating warship passed through the territory of the forest fairies. Both sides engaged in a fierce battle, and the ship rushed over with some damage. A month later, the floating warship passed through the territory of the frost giants. Relying on the warship's thick defenses, it once again forced its way through. 2 months later, in the last dangerous area, the floating warship was surrounded by a large group of thunder rocks. Even the defensive spell formation had been breached twice. 2 magi on the ship died in battle, and only then did they manage to repel the enemy's attack with great difficulty. Finally, on the 72nd day after boarding the floating warship, they successfully passed through the dark forest and arrived at the territory of the Silver Alliance. The floating warship dragged its damaged body and slowly flew out of the dark forest. Grim stood at the bow of the ship, surveying the plains below him. He could clearly see that the darkness that had not faded for a long time was gradually disappearing, replaced by the green plains and brown earth that he had not seen for a long time. In the distance, a Magus tower that towered into the clouds stood silently. Eye-catching magic light flowed slowly, and powerful magic ripples swept across the horizon from time to time. At the edge of the dark forest, there was a small sentry tower every few kilometers, with faint magic undulations flickering on it. The large Magus tower and the small sentry tower were connected to each other, working together to protect the land that humans relied on for survival. As if sensing their arrival, a black figure appeared in the sky in the distance. It was a group of magi riding giant eagles, hurrying over. The Magus of the Silver Alliance once again appeared in front of everyone, excitedly announcing, "Friends from afar, after a long journey, Welcome to the territory of the Silver Alliance. Chapter 279. After flying for another 70 kilometers, they finally arrived at the first city under the Silver Alliance's rule, Sigma City. As one of the only two intercontinental routes in the Silver Alliance's territory, Sigma City's grandeur and liveliness were worthy of praise. Here, even the wizards from the top families in the central part of the continent could only restrain their arrogance and carefully understand the internal rules and regulations of the Silver Alliance. Through the conversation along the way, Grimm had a preliminary understanding. On the west coast of the continent, in the area ruled by the Silver Alliance, the first people to not provoke were the silver-robed wizards. Of course, if you had the confidence to kill a silver-robed wizard without being noticed by the outside world, then that was a different story. However, along the way, Grimm mostly saw small guard towers and mysterious round runes patrolling the sky. They seemed to be part of a huge security system. Wanting to kill a silver-robed wizard without making a sound in this area was simply wishful thinking. As long as they discovered any clues, with the help of prophecy and recall spells, the culprit will be found no matter how well he hid. If one wanted to survive here, the only way to protect oneself was to avoid conflict with any silver-robed wizard. The second was the arcane sorcerer. No matter how down and out he looked, it was still the same. The entire Silver Alliance was an organization formed by groups of arcane sorcerers. Silver-robed wizards were usually the enforcers of the Alliance, while arcane wizards were the vast and solid foundation of the Alliance. Therefore, in the areas ruled by the Silver Alliance, arcane wizards had an unparalleled status. It was obvious that they had formed a hierarchy that suppressed the wizards of other branches. Fortunately, the higher-ups of the Silver Alliance were not so stupid and short-sighted. Although they would obviously side with the arcane sorcerers when there was a dispute between the sorcerers, they still gave enough respect and courtesy to the outstanding sorcerers of the other branches. The airship had arrived at Sigma City, which was the end of the journey. Traveling within the region relied more on small airships, while the airship was purely used to pass through the wilderness. After getting off the airship, everyone said goodbye and went their separate ways. Everyone had different reasons for coming to the west coast of the continent. Although Sky City was a must-visit destination, it would take 20 days to reach Sky City from Sigma City by flying ship. Therefore, dispersing and doing their own things was the most suitable method. Inside Sigma City, the Byron family had also set up a base here. However, it was located in the western part of the city. If they wanted to get there, they would have to cross half of the city. Grimm could see that Wizard Angus was in a hurry. It seemed like he wanted to get to the stopping point as soon as possible to get the latest information. However, it was Grimm's first time coming to an area ruled by a large wizard organization. He wanted to slowly experience the local customs. The two of them had a brief discussion. Wizard Angus left a meeting point and hurriedly left with his family members. Soon, only Grimm, Alice, and Kirby were left. This was a completely different city. There were no towering city walls, nor were there any watchtowers. There were only clean streets and tall, sturdy marble buildings. Wizard apprentices in short gray robes could be seen everywhere on the streets. There were also powerful mercenaries and adventurers with swords and blades on their backs. However, most of them were carriages carrying large amounts of goods. Among the pedestrians, there were mostly merchants, warriors, wanderers, and residents of the city. Due to the climate, the clothes of the residents here were mostly made of thin cloth. The colors they chose were also very eye-catching: white, red, blue, orange, yellow, and so on. Humans usually wore long-sleeved tunics, loose pants, and leather boots. Their expressions were relaxed and cheerful, unlike the dull and numb expressions of other regions. Every now and then, a few official magi could be seen bringing along a gigantic stone golem or iron golem as they rumbled through the streets. Although the people along the way tried to avoid them, they did not show any fear on their faces. Here, the wizards seemed to have merged with the commoners. There was no obvious class oppression or awe-inspiring sense of mystery. If Grimm had to evaluate it, He would say that although the scattered forest of pagodas was vast, it was full of clans and disputes. Even if a so-called loose alliance was formed, it was limited by its weak binding power and execution ability. It was impossible for it to achieve anything great. However, this place was obviously different. This was a region dominated by the Silver Alliance, so it was also the region with the best enforcement of various rules and regulations. Here, there was no outsider wizard who dared to challenge the authority of the Silver Alliance. The Silver Alliance also adhered to the policy of opening up to the outside world and vigorously developing trade. Therefore, there were countless wizards and elites from other regions. Their arrival had undoubtedly greatly boosted the flow of knowledge and resources within the Silver Alliance. This place was obviously more lively and peaceful than the scattered pagoda forest area. Grimm's 2-meter-tall body was accompanied by two little fellows who were about a meter tall. Hence, the combination of the three of them was exceptionally eye-catching. However, anyone who got slightly closer to Grimm would be able to sense the calm, wise, and merciless nature of an official magus, as well as the spiritual pressure of someone at the top of the food chain. Grimm was speechless as he looked at the panicking crowd in front of him, then at the acolytes who were looking at him in astonishment. He could only retract his aura and do his best to suppress the undulations of his spiritual force to the lowest possible level. He was used to staying in the scattered tower forest, so he did not have to worry about whether his spiritual pressure would have any adverse effects on the people around him. Although Grimm was still influenced by the concept of equality in his previous life, which prevented him from enslaving mortals like cattle or sheep, the arrogance of wizards had subtly changed him. In comparison, the Silver Alliance had a much better grasp of the social atmosphere than the scattered tower forest. It also gave many elites who were not magi a chance to stand out. If he had the chance to choose, Grimm felt that the environment of the Silver Alliance was more suitable for him. Are we going to stand here for the whole day? Alice stood on her tiptoes as she looked at the bustling crowd, looking like she could not wait to take a stroll. It looks very lively over there. The green elf cabbie also saw a few other races in the crowd. They were either servants of a magus or some humanoid creatures that had made their identities public. They had their arms around the acolytes, warriors, and mercenaries, excitedly carrying their strange-looking prey as they rushed into one shop after another, trying their best to sell the spoils of war they had obtained from the Dark Forest. Cabby carefully removed his disguise spell and turned back into his original goblin appearance. As he stood in the bustling stream of people, when he saw that they didn't display any disgust or panic towards his appearance, only then did Cabby relax. For the first time, it could finally face the human city under the rule of the wizards with its chest out and stomach full of confidence and confidence. I love this place. Cabby roared madly in his heart. Sensing the passion in the hearts of his two followers, Grimm shook his head and laughed, bringing them into the crowd. Grimm, who had withdrawn all his spiritual force, was like a young noble with an extraordinary temperament. He was handsome and had a dignified appearance. Even without the pressure of his spiritual force, his 2-meter-tall body was filled with a strong sense of oppression. Wherever he went, the passers-by would automatically make way for him, not daring to block his path. As he moved forward, his gaze wandered back and forth between shops. Flower shops, tailors, general stores, leather shops, secret spell shops, herb shops, pet shops. Grimm even saw a Tolson search shop, a small shop that used divination spells to help citizens find lost items. The one who opened the shop was a high-ranked acolyte, obviously trying to use his knowledge of magi to earn some living expenses. As for the flower shops, they did not sell ordinary flowers like roses, lilies, or blue lilies. Instead, they sold lustrous moonflowers, sunflowers, golden ginseng, and dragonbone grass. These things were either helpful for the meditation of acolytes, nourishing their bloodline power, or commonly used by acolytes. The tailor shop sold apprentice robes and wizard robes with special enchantments. They even sold wizard pouches with a storage space. The leather shops bought the furs of wild beasts and monsters brought back from the dark forest by adventurers or acolytes at a high price. They also bought the flesh and bones of those monsters. Since the flesh and blood of monsters were immersed in elemental aura all year round, as long as the poison was removed, they would be the best magic ingredient. As for the bones of monsters, as long as they were carved and processed properly, they could be made into simple ornaments that had a certain degree of magical effects. Sorcerers would definitely not be interested in these things, but for sorcerer apprentices, wealthy merchants, and nobles, they were already rare treasures. Grimm brought Alice and Cabby along as they strolled around. Only then did he understand that as the eastern gate of the Silver Alliance through the Dark Forest, the resources sold in Sigma City were obviously targeted at the middle class. Ordinary citizens would not be able to afford it. After a simple tour, Grimm shook his head regretfully. These resources might be of some use to Alice, but to a real wizard, they were too common. From this, it seemed that the resources that wizards needed would definitely be sold in a special place. Chapter 280. Every time he went to a place, he would gather the local knowledge. This had become an instinct that was etched into the soul of every magus. Although there were many rare and special knowledge that he could not obtain, the general knowledge of the region was enough to satisfy Grimm. After staying in Sigma City for 2 days, the airship that they had been waiting for arrived at Sky City. After a brief tour of the Silver Alliance's territory, Grimm and the rest began to head towards the holy city in the hearts of the arcane magi, Sky City. Night fell. Grimm, dressed in a black robe, sat at the table, the white feather pen in his hand, constantly calculating something on a stack of parchment paper. Densely packed symbols, formulas, and data filled the paper. As the tip of the pen rustled, his black eyes flashed with blue light. It was obvious that the AI chip was calculating something at the same time. To be honest, most of the calculations and deductions were done by the AI chip. What Grimm needed to do was to arrange the data the AI chip calculated and think about the next step. Ever since he chose to specialize in fire, his ability to sense and control other elemental particles had become weaker and weaker. However, the power of fire spells had once again increased. Whether it was the distance of the flame leap, the damage of the lava fireball, or the power of the fire core explosion, they had all reached the limit of his current spiritual force. The molten core explosion's 115 fire damage put him at the top of the Tier 1 Magi's team. Meanwhile, most ordinary Magi's attack damage hovered around the 80 to 100 range. Only a handful of them could break the 100 to 100 mark. As the AI chip grasped more and more knowledge about fire spells, a system of fire spells was established in its database. As he continued to decipher and fuse with the runes of the foreign world, Grimm could vaguely see a way to strengthen himself. According to the AI chip statistics, Grimm's utilization of his resources had always been at a low level. Whether it was the power of fire spells or the explosive increase in his physique from the Balrog transformation, Grimm had never used them to their fullest. Instead, he was in a state of extreme wastage. Should he walk the path of a ranged elemental magus, close-quarters combat, or a combination of both, he would make different choices depending on his enemies. Until now, Grimm had yet to form an effective fighting style. Most of the time, he completely relied on the extravagant use of his own resources, using his overly powerful body to overwhelm and defeat his opponent. It was fine to use it occasionally when he had the upper hand, but if he encountered an enemy who was stronger than him in the future, recklessly charging forward like a wild boar would only harm him. Therefore, Grimm wanted to use this opportunity to determine a few core spells for himself and create his own battle style around them. Based on his countless battle experiences, Grimm understood the importance of a mobile spell to a battle wizard. Therefore, when he thought about his core spell, Grimm's first thought was to use the most frequently used spell, Flame Leap. It could be said that without Flame Jump, Grimm's chances of surviving the previous battles would be less than 10%. Thanks to Flaming Leap, Grim wasn't forced to fight to the death when he encountered powerful enemies. Therefore, if there was a need to arrange a strategy, it would probably revolve around Flaming Jump. Now that he had a mobility spell, what about an offensive spell? There was a period of time when Grim thought that his core offensive spell should be Molten Core Explosion. This was because it was the most powerful of all fire elemental offensive spells. However, according to the AI chip statistics, Grim's most frequently used fire elemental spell was the Lava Fireball. With Grim's current fire elemental abilities, he only needed 1/2 seconds to condense a lava fireball. However, considering the frequency at which his spiritual force could withstand and the speed at which he condensed the elemental energy, he could still summon 2 lava fireballs in 3 seconds. The lava fireball had 45 degrees of fire elemental damage, and it also had 15 degrees of lava explosion damage. It also had the additional effect of sputtering lava in a 10-meter radius. Coupled with the 30% increase in fire damage from Molten Core Explosion, the lava fireball's attack power reached a terrifying 60 degrees. This attack power was slightly lower than the 115 degrees of damage from Molten Core Explosion, but the lava fireball's speed was too fast. In the middle of an intense battle, where could he find a safe place to calmly chant incantations and slowly cast large-scale spells? In comparison, the lava fireball, which could be summoned instantaneously, was much easier to control the rhythm of the battle. Even if he needed to use a powerful spell to break through his opponent's defenses, Grim had the 6 powerful spells stored in the secret voodoo scroll that he could use. He did not need to risk being attacked by his opponent. Therefore, the first wave of core spells was decided upon. The mobility spell Flaming Leap, the offensive spell Lava Fireball, and the defensive spell Flame Barrier. There was a reason why he had chosen the Flame Barrier and not the Lava Shield. In terms of physical defense, the Flame Barrier might be inferior to the Lava Shield. However, in terms of both offense and defense, the Flame Barrier's damage was far superior to the Lava Shield's. The Flame Barrier had a radius of a few hundred meters, so no one dared to step into it while fighting Grim. Otherwise, the 10 degrees of fire damage per second would be endless. As long as you were in the Flame Barrier, you would never be able to escape. Moreover, Grim had combined the 3 core spells into one system and created a suitable battle strategy for himself. There was still room for improvement in the battle potential of these 3 spells. However, as Grim was busy calculating the spell models of the 3 core spells, there was a knock on the wooden door of the room. Asterisk knock knock asterisk. Who is it? Grim was not in a good mood after being disturbed at such a crucial time. Mr. Grim, it's me. The voice of Wizard Angus came from outside the door. Grim hesitated for a moment. He simply tidied up the information on the table and covered up the parchment papers that were related to his secrets. He then walked to the door, removed the protection spell, and opened the wooden door. Wizard Angus, who came to visit in the middle of the night, had an ugly look on his face. He wanted to say something, but he was hesitating. Mr. Angus, after such a long journey, we could be considered friends now. Is there anything you can't say to a friend? Grim saw that Angus was in a difficult situation, so he took the initiative to ask. This. Angus hesitated for a moment and finally opened his mouth. I just received a message from my family. The magic puppet competition, this time, might be in trouble. What happened? The wizard from the family that challenged us actually created a steel knight. I heard that its power is amazing, and it has already defeated the arcane wizard sent by 2 trading companies. Now, the family is in a mess. Grim's eyes narrowed. Are you planning to ask for a truce? Angus nodded with difficulty and said bitterly, It's very possible. The family has already secretly sent people to contact the other party. If the other party's conditions are not too harsh, the family might just give up on this competition and directly admit defeat. Seeing that Grim had a thoughtful look on his face, Angus quickly comforted him. Don't worry, sir. Even if we can't continue this competition, our family will still give you the reward we promised. I can still make the decision for this kind of thing. Grim shook his head and laughed. That's not what I'm worried about. I'm just regretting that I've lost a chance to exchange pointers with other arcane wizards. Angus laughed and said, Do you still have to worry about this when we reach Sky City? Although the competition for shops only happens once every 10 years, the arena, there is never a day of peace. As long as you have confidence in your puppet and are willing to bet, you can stay in the arena every day. After that, the two of them chatted for a while more before Angus took his leave. After sending Angus off, Grim sat back at the table and could not help but start planning in silence. According to his original plan, he wanted to help the Byron family win the competition and leave Kirby there to be taken care of. After all, he could not stay in Sky City for long, and Kirby was a goblin of a different race. The possibility of him staying here alone was almost zero. If the competition was canceled and the other party paid him the promised reward, it would be impulsive for him to make such a request again. When that time came, how could he find a way to keep Kirby in Sky City? After all, the Byron family had a rank 2 magus overseeing it. Even such an organization would not be able to protect their reputation in Sky City. How could a magus goblin with no combat ability survive in this land of tigers and wolves? The more he thought about it, the more Grim felt that he was being impulsive. After all, he was alone. Of the two subordinates he had in name, one only had the strength of a quasi-magus and was facing a battle of destiny with an uncertain future. The other only had the spiritual force of a magus, but no combat ability. When it came to needing help, the two of them would not be useful at all. Right now, he was also in a period where his strength was on the rise. He needed to gather all his strength and resources and properly develop them. He did not need to play chess and pave the way in advance. Chapter 281. 20 days later. Eager to see the legendary Sky City as soon as possible, Grim washed up early in the morning and had his breakfast. He then strolled up to the deck. At this moment, the deck was already crowded with people. Even many wizards who had been silent since they boarded the flying ship were among them. They occupied some of the most advantageous positions on the ship's railings, quietly waiting for the holy city to appear. At this moment, the flying ship was flying through the clouds. White clouds that looked like cotton candy were torn into pieces by the wind particles, leaving a white cloud path behind the ship. Just as everyone was anxiously waiting, their eyes suddenly lit up. The flying ship pierced through the clouds and plunged into the clear sky. The sky was so blue. On the vast green grassland, one could see gray roads that extended in all directions. There were also alchemy castles scattered everywhere, as well as vast pastures for cattle and sheep. Between the sky and the earth, a majestic and holy city that was filled with a mysterious aura floated there, quietly waiting for them to visit. From afar, Sky City looked like an inverted pyramid. The top was thick and round, while the bottom was slightly sharp. Below the city was a layer of sand that had been dug out from the ground. After some magic treatment, it had turned into a small inverted mountain. Directly below Sky City was a huge lake that occupied an area of more than 10,000 acres. Looking at its size and shape, it was easy to understand the origin of Sky City. The Sky Castle clearly had some kind of repulsive force field, so an invisible air barrier pushed all the clouds in the sky to the periphery, forming an empty area within a radius of 30 kilometers around it. Just now, the airship had pierced through the sea of clouds and entered this clear area. Suddenly, the strange sound of gears turning could be heard in the air. Giant rocks that were floating in the air slowly approached the flying ship. This is the first test to enter Sky City. Everyone, do not resist, and you are not allowed to attack these mechanical guards. A magus from the Alliance on the flying ship, wearing a silver robe, commanded loudly. With the expansion of his mysterious authority, although his voice was not loud, it could be heard by every living being on the flying ship. Even the magi who had sealed themselves in their rooms were no exception. Mechanical guards? Grim glanced at the boulders doubtfully. There were 5 boulders in total. Each of them was 3 meters tall and 2 meters thick. The surface was craggy and covered with sand. There were even some vines and small trees growing on them. It seemed to be a huge rock that was temporarily cut from the top of the mountain. However, when they got close to the airship, The interior of the rock suddenly emitted a dazzling fluorescence, and a large number of complicated and fine rune lines and witchcraft symbols appeared on the surface. Following which, the boulders trembled and the rocks shifted, revealing black holes. Immediately afterward, some metallic mechanical arms extended out from the inside, snaking towards the airship. At the end of the mechanical arm, a strange creature with bloodshot eyes was scanning its surroundings. As the giant rock floated near the flying ship, the eyeballs at the end of the metal tentacles shot out strange blue rays and slowly scanned everyone. 5 boulders surrounded the airship, almost sealing it off from the outside world. Blue light webs crisscrossed and scanned everyone in the airship. Even the thick cabin boards could not stop the blue light from penetrating. Even the people in the ship's cabin were scanned and found out. With the reminder from the Alliance Magi, the Magi on the airship did not cast any spells to prevent the blue light from penetrating. The blue light was obviously a low-level detection spell, mainly used to identify living beings and check if the target was disguised or parasitized. It would not touch on the deeper secrets of the Magi. Everything was fine when it scanned the Magi, but when it scanned Cabby, the blue light paused for a moment. However, an identity amulet on Cabby's neck also lit up with a magical glow, and the blue light swept past it without triggering the alarm system. This amulet was specially made for Cabby by the silver-robed Magus on the airship. Without it, creatures like Cabby would not be able to move an inch in Sky City. The amulet stored the magic imprints of Cabby's contract owner, Grim, and the guardian Magus, Angus. If it was lost, he would be detained or banished by the guards of Sky City. The inspection didn't take long. After the blue light had scanned the entire airship, the boulders retracted their metal tentacles and turned back into floating boulders, slowly leaving. Grim glanced around. Every airship that emerged from the sea of clouds was surrounded by a number of mechanical guards, the flickering blue light clearly visible. After the inspection, the airship began to move forward again, gradually approaching the outer ring of Sky City. As they got closer and closer, the Sky Castle that was only vaguely visible just now finally unveiled its mysterious veil, revealing its true face in front of everyone. To be honest, although they had read about sky castles in many books, when it was presented in front of them for the first time, many of the Magi who visited for the first time were still shocked. Looking down from above, the Sky Castle looked like 3 huge concentric rings, dividing the outline of the entire city into 3 distinct sections. This was probably the origin of the inner ring, middle ring, and outer ring. All the strange and fantasy-like buildings were built on these rings. Every inch of land was worth its weight in gold, and every inch of land was covered by densely packed buildings and plants. The 3 rings were separated by some mysterious force, making it difficult to cross. Only special bridges could be used to travel between them. From Grimm's point of view, he could see wooden buildings, tall and sturdy stone buildings, and high-tech metal buildings hidden in the shade of the trees. Towering towers, circular palaces, strange and twisted buildings of other races. This place had almost become an exhibition of special buildings. There were all kinds of strange buildings that one could imagine. Pedestrians as small as ants came and went on the white and spacious streets. It was extremely lively. In the inner ring, a real mountain had been transplanted there. Many huge and magnificent buildings were built on top of the mountain, looking down at the whole Sky City in a dignified manner. Above Sky City, there were even larger mountains and boulders floating in the air. One could vaguely see that there were many caves on them, and Magi riding huge flying mounts could be seen entering and exiting them. Grimm guessed that this was some kind of military station, and it was also part of Sky City's huge and tight defense system. There were even more small alchemy guards. Together with the giant birds carrying goods, they formed a busy and orderly corner of Sky City's sky. The place where the airship stopped was the Outer Ring's flying platform. There was a flying platform like this almost every 5 miles. The airship rose and fell on it, and it seemed very busy. When Wizard Angus led Grimm, Alice, and Cabby down from the airship and stepped on the clean marble floor of Sky City. They looked around at the strange and mysterious scene. Their faces showed a trace of disbelief. Warm sunlight shone down from the sky and shone on the Alchemy City. There were spots of light reflected from the surface of the exquisite buildings everywhere. This made the city in the sky even more beautiful and resplendent. Most of the people shuttling around Grimm and the others were sorcerers, but there were also a few sorcerer apprentices mixed in. There were also some creatures of different races in luxurious clothing. As for those ordinary people, they had no right to step into this great city that symbolized the highest level of alchemy in the sorcerer world. Grimm observed carefully. On the flying platform, the coolies loading and unloading the goods were all tall and mighty iron golems. Although their movements were a little clumsy, their efficiency was 10 times, no, 100 times better than human coolies. The ones directing them were the acolytes. It seemed like the people at the bottom of the Sky City were the acolytes. As soon as Grimm and the others stepped out of the flying platform, an alchemy carriage steadily stopped in front of them. Golden carriages, golden wheels, golden attendants, and even the 2 horses pulling the carriages were also golden. The 2 golden horses stopped in front of Grimm, snorting and lightly tapping their hooves. They were no different from real horses. However, Grimm's perception was very clear. They were not real living beings, but alchemy creations, or rather, alchemy creatures. Let's meet at 167 Champs-Élysées Street. Wizard Angus was the first to get on a carriage. He nodded at Grimm and left. When the alchemy horse galloped at full speed, it didn't give off the feeling of being stiff and sluggish like metal. Even when the hard metal hooves landed on the smooth marble floor, there wasn't any deafening sound as expected. The alchemy carriage was like a small boat floating on the water, calmly and quickly weaving in and out of the crowd, disappearing into the vast sea of people. Grimm looked at the blurred and fantastical scene in front of him in shock. In his mind, he could not help but associate this scene with some super sci-fi scenes from Earth. In his mind, the Chip's prompts never stopped. Beep. Discovered an unknown alchemy creature. Beep. Detected the existence of an unknown force field. Beep. Detected a strange life form. There were too many things here that exceeded his expectations. It made him feel like he was on Earth from the future. Could it be that when the study of the occult reached its peak, it would be the same as a technological civilization and eventually walk the same path? While Grimm was in a daze, Alice kept shouting. Every time she saw a mysterious object that she had never seen before, she could not help but cry out in surprise. On the other hand, Goblin Cabby was lying on the alchemy carriage, touching everything here and there. He even used his teeth to nibble on it from time to verify his conjecture. Looking at the infatuated smile on his face, he must have thought that he had arrived at the legendary El Dorado. Let's go. Grimm closed his eyes for a moment to calm himself down. He turned around and ordered, "Let's settle down here first, then come out for a stroll." The 3 of them entered the alchemy carriage in front of them, to 167 Champs-Élysées Street. Chapter 282. The journey was as fast as lightning. The semi-open compartment allowed them to have a panoramic view of the scenery outside. There were low, damp caves, crooked wooden huts, tall and sturdy stone fortresses, alchemy castles that gave off a strange, illusory feeling. It was as if they had stepped into a fantasy city. Everywhere they looked, they could see strange buildings that gave off a mysterious feeling. Some of the buildings were bustling with activity. Some of the buildings were too eerie and terrifying, and there were few customers. Some of the buildings were simply inexplicable, and it was difficult to determine their purpose from their appearance. It was obvious that the Silver Alliance would not restrict or interfere with the business of these areas after selling them. Once you obtain this area, you can open it up as a shop. Up to you. Treat it as a warehouse. Up to you. Even transform it into a haunted house. Up to you. As long as you paid the rental fees on time and your business did not harm the interests of Sky City, No one would interfere with what you did in your own area. This was probably the main reason why the buildings in the outer ring were so strange. Sky City was divided into the inner ring, the middle ring, and the outer ring. The area they occupied was roughly 1, 3, 6. Therefore, in the third ring road, the outer ring road had the largest area, and 348 shops were sold to non-members of the Silver Alliance. This number sounded like a lot, but when distributed evenly across the entire Magus continent, it was like trying to put out a cart of firewood with a cup of water. Among them, there were many terrifying fellows who did not belong to any Magus family. They were just individuals looking for a place to settle down. Most of these fellows were powerful rank 2 magi who were unwilling to be restricted by their families or organizations. There was no lack of rank 3 powerhouses among them. Hence, in the outer ring, if one did not know the ins and outs of the place, any inconspicuous person or small shop was not someone one could casually provoke. If one made a mistake and provoked a low-profile big shot, they had too many methods to avoid the silver-robed magi and cause one to die without knowing why. The alchemy carriage slowly came to a stop in front of the Byron family shop. 2 magic crystals. The alchemy horse turned its head and actually spoke the human language from its metallic mouth. Grim gasped in surprise and tossed out 2 magic crystals, which they swallowed in one gulp before leaving. An acolyte with the crest of the Byron family on his chest was bowing as he led Grim and the others into the backyard. Most of the shops here had shops in the front and residences in the back. Byron Material. The name of the shop was concise and to the point. Its main business was selling some rare resources in the gloomy crypt. Among them, the most precious were the Spectre Mushroom and the Night Eye Stone. Waiting for Grim in the backyard was a middle-aged female wizard. Her looks were not bad, and her strange red robe was quite eye-catching. However, what was even more eye-catching was the strength that she revealed. When Grim saw her for the first time, his heart skipped a beat, and he hurriedly greeted her with a wizard's greeting. As for Alice, who had always been fearless, she pulled KB far away, not daring to listen to the conversation between the 2 magi. "You're the puppeteer that Angus hired? You look very young." The red-robed witch asked coldly. "Greetings, Master Nunnally. I'm Grim, a wizard from the Cerubo family. You don't seem to be an arcane magus." "Yes, Master. I walk the path of an elemental magus, but I have some unique skills in making elemental puppets. That's why I was chosen by Wizard Angus when I was still an acolyte. I'm going to participate in this competition." "Elemental puppets? I'm afraid these guys can't compare to those meticulously made metal magic puppets. Do you have confidence in this arcana competition?" Although the red-robed, which was a rank 2 magus, she still hesitated when it came to some professional questions. "On the way here, Wizard Angus told me that there seems to be some changes in the competition." "There are no changes," the red-robed, which replied firmly. "The conditions that they've proposed are too harsh. We can't accept them at all. Therefore, the competition will continue. I only have one question for you. Do you have the confidence to defeat the magic puppet knights of the opposing family?" "Master, before I answer this question, I hope to understand the abilities and basic data of the opponent's magic puppet." Grim thought carefully and did not answer directly. "This is for you." The red-robed, which threw a photographic crystal into Grim's arms and ordered him stiffly, "You have 1 night to think about it. You must give me an answer tomorrow morning. If you don't have the confidence to defeat the opponent, our family will have to find a way to invite an arcane master over." Arcane masters were professional magi who studied the art of making puppets and runes as their own profession. Their individual combat ability might be weak, but the magic puppets they made were all very powerful. It was a very difficult task to hire an arcane master in Sky City. The amount of favors and resources needed was simply unimaginable. If the Byron family was really forced to this step, even if they won in the end, they would probably have to hand over a large portion of the shop's income for the next 10 years. However, this shop was extremely important to the Byron family. Apart from earning huge profits from selling the resources in the Nyon region, this shop was also a convenient channel for the Byron family to gather resources from all over the Magus continent. Once this channel was cut off, the family would immediately lose more than half of their resources. At that time, it would be 10 times more difficult for the family to nurture magi that belonged to them. This was undoubtedly detrimental to the development and growth of a magus family. Hence, at this moment, the rank 2 magus of the Byron family could not help but feel nervous. Night fell. Grim hid in the residence that the Byron family had prepared for him, and carefully and meticulously scanned through the photographic crystal that the red-robed magus had given him. The photographic crystal contained images of the battle between the opponent's magic puppet and other golems. Though the battle was very short, it was enough for the AI chip to analyze large amounts of information that would be useful to him. After watching all the details of the battle many times, the AI chip successfully obtained the rough data of the Magic Puppet Knight. Magic Puppet Knight, combat type, activated rune. Height of 3 meters, body flickering with a dark, dull metallic luster. Its appearance was that of a knight wearing heavy armor. It wielded a shield in its left hand and a sword in its right. Its close combat ability far surpassed that of ordinary golems or magic puppets. Stats: Strength 14, Agility 9, Vitality 12, Spirit 7. This was a combat magic puppet that had been strengthened many times. Not only did it have an indestructible body made of magic iron alloy, it also had an imposing strength that left one speechless. However, the thing that gave Grimm the biggest headache was its extremely high battle instincts and intelligence. That's right. What was unexpected was that a cold and emotionless metal magic puppet made of pure magic iron alloy actually possessed a high level of basic intelligence. It would be too disrespectful to call such a thing a magic puppet. The most suitable term for it would be a construct creature. A construct that had undergone a rune activation spell and possessed a human-like intelligence. Of course, if its intelligence could be increased a little, raising its spiritual force from 7 to 11, then it would immediately leap from a construct to a metallic life form. A special life form that had a metallic body and elemental energy as its blood, a metallic life form. Construct creatures were still considered servants of magi, but metallic life forms were already qualified to be mentioned in the same breath as magi. Normal magic puppets would never possess intelligence unless the magus who created them had mixed in a powerful consciousness during the rune activation spell. Only then would there be a chance for it to awaken its basic intelligence. As for the more advanced intermediate intelligence, it could not be achieved through spells. It could only be achieved through the gradual evolution of an individual with basic intelligence. In the image recording crystal, not only did the magic puppet possess basic intelligence, it also seemed to have retained some night battle techniques. This meant that the soul that the arcane sorcerer had activated into the body of the magic puppet was the soul of a high-level knight. It had to be at least a grade 2 knight. Such a powerful knight was hard to find in the Magus continent. The only possible source of the soul was a secondary plane. Moreover, the arcane sorcerer's family had spared no expense in creating this magic puppet. Even the sword and shield it held were not ordinary goods. The heavy tower shield was mainly made of mansoda alloy, which was known for its sturdiness. It was also mixed with star iron, which had anti-magic properties. Hence, it had a terrifying defense against both physical and magical attacks. As for the knight's sword, it was made of pure eternium. Although it was not as sturdy as mansoda alloy, it had good magic conductivity, which made it easier to use the knight's battle techniques. Moreover, the edge of the knight's sword was coated with fine gold, which gave it the elementary effects of oblivion and sharpness. This sword and shield had already reached the level of a beginner magic tool. It was many times stronger than a normal magic artifact. To be honest, after seeing the magic puppet's terrifying battle strength, even Grimm did not have the confidence he had before. If he were to skin this magic puppet and extract all the precious magic metals from its body, it would be worth more than 70,000 magic crystals. If he included the effort that the arcane sorcerer had put into creating it and the soul of the grade 2 knight, it would definitely be worth more than 120,000 magic crystals. The Grade 2 Molten Giant Core that Grimm had used to create the Inferno Tyrant was worth no more than 50,000 magic crystals. Although Grimm was unwilling to admit it, from all aspects and perspectives, it seemed like his Inferno Tyrant had no chance of winning against that magic puppet knight. The difference in their basic battle strength could be deduced from the resources used to create them. For the fastest novel reading, please visit Chapter 283. The Magic Puppet Knight's basic battle strength was evaluated as Strength 14, Agility 9, Vitality 12, Spirit 7. The Inferno Tyrant's basic battle strength was evaluated by the AI chip as Strength 9, Agility 7, Vitality 11, Spirit 18. If one really had to evaluate the difference in battle strength between the two, it could only be said that they each had their own strengths and weaknesses. The Magic Puppet Knight was strong, had a strong shield and sharp sword, and was also proficient in close combat techniques. It was completely capable of withstanding a Magus crazy bombardment to get close to the opponent and chop them to the ground. However, its spirit was only at 7 points, which indicated that the energy reserves in its body could not support a prolonged battle. This was perhaps the only flaw in its body. As for the Inferno Tyrant, its vitality and strength were enough to crush ordinary magi and magic puppets. However, against a top-notch magic puppet knight that excelled in both physical and magical defense, its basic stats were obviously not enough. The Inferno Tyrant's spirit was extremely high, which allowed it to pour out large amounts of spells on its enemies without restraint. However, its overall battle strength was still much lower than the magic puppet knight. The part that was inferior was reflected in the addition of auxiliary equipment. The Magic Puppet Knight's body was built using ordinary magic iron alloy. This was actually an act of helplessness. After all, if an all-metal magic puppet that was 3 meters tall and weighed 76 tons was built entirely with a higher grade of Mandisur alloy, the cost of the Magic Puppet Knight would probably increase by more than 4 or 5 times. Therefore, in order to reduce the cost and maintain the Magic Puppet Knight's powerful battle strength, the Magic Puppet Master of the Greto family used magic iron alloy to build the magic puppet's body, and then equipped it with a tower shield made of Mandisur alloy. This took into account both cost and battle strength at the same time. Coupled with the integration of a high-grade knight's soul, it created a terrifying battle strength that could sweep away all opponents of the same level. In comparison, the Inferno Tyrant was better at long-range attacks. Therefore, when the two of them started fighting, the battle scene was more like a battle between an elemental magus and a physique refinement magus. If the opponent got close, the Inferno Tyrant's elemental body would not be able to withstand the terrifying attack of the wizard weapon. Once its body was disassembled, the Inferno Tyrant's strength would decline severely, and it would be extremely difficult to win again. Therefore, the key to the entire battle was how to maintain a good distance from the opponent and then use the Inferno Tyrant's endless stream of terrifying fireballs to knock the enemy down and smash them into pieces. Even if the Inferno Tyrant's spirit had already reached 18 points, it would still be difficult for him to possess such fine and detailed battle techniques. Sometimes, intelligence did not represent wisdom. This was a principle that all magi understood. If spirit represented everything, why would wizards need to accumulate knowledge day after day and hone their battle-casting skills? All the magi stayed in the Magus Tower and didn't go anywhere. They drank potions and meditated like crazy, trying their best to raise their spiritual force. That was why the only way for the Inferno Tyrant to execute this guerrilla warfare plan perfectly was for Grimm to personally take the field and use his own consciousness to control the Inferno Tyrant's body, then coordinate perfectly with the AI chip. In that case, in order to achieve this, it seemed like the Inferno Tyrant still needed some modifications and corrections. The next day, when the red-robed witch appeared in front of Grimm again, she was greeted with a long list of items. Contrary to Grimm's expectations, Lady Nunnally, the Tier 2 Red Witch, was overjoyed when she saw the list. She immediately instructed Angus, who followed behind her, to complete the list. It was obvious that Lady Nunnally had suffered a great deal of humiliation in the early days of her contact with the Greto family. Hence, when Grimm displayed his confidence in the arcane competition, she immediately used her authority to give him her full support. The agreed time between the two families was 7 days later, so there was not much time left for Grimm. Leona's mushroom hut. This was a witch's residence situated on top of a small dark swamp. It was less than 10 acres of land, but under the influence of a strange spell formation, it gave one the strange feeling of being in a boundless black swamp. The ground was filled with muddy, filthy, smelly puddles. The slowly rolling and flowing water was shockingly thick. Damp fog rose and gathered above the dark swamp, blocking the bright sunlight that shone everywhere in Sky City. This made the dark swamp seem even more gloomy and eerie. Grimm held Alice's hand as they carefully walked between the quagmires. He didn't dare to let his feet touch the muddy water. The data that the AI chip projected into his mind showed that the smelly water was extremely poisonous. Even the air in the swamp was filled with poison. Regular people would die instantly if they breathed in here, but a magus like him could still breathe freely. However, every time he breathed in, the terrifyingly high temperature in his nasal cavity, trachea, and alveoli would kill countless virus-causing bacteria. His body, which had turned into energy, was no longer afraid of this kind of biological poison. As he exhaled, a black gas visible to the naked eye would gush out. These were the remnants of dead poisonous bacteria. Most of the resources he needed to modify the Inferno Tyrant had already been prepared by the Byron family, but he was still lacking some rare resources. Lady Nunnally had asked around and found that the rank 2 witch Leona, who lived in seclusion in this mushroom hut, seemed to have some in stock. Hence, Grimm had no choice but to visit her personally. As for why Lady Nunnally did not come personally, the reason was so simple that it made one speechless. This Lady Leona seemed to be a witch with a strange temperament. She hated all false witches. From her point of view, only those who had inherited the knowledge of ancient witches and adhered to their beliefs and traditions were true witches. The truth of witches lay in the choice of fate and the guidance of the Witch King. Those who no longer believed in the Witch King could only be called female magi, and were not worthy of the title of witch. Unfortunately, Lady Nunnally had become one of the targets of witch Leona's rejection. Before stepping into the dark swamp, Grimm could even see a corner of the rank 2 witch's mushroom hut through the hazy fog and the gaps between the ghost trees. However, ever since he entered the swamp, he had walked for an hour and changed his line of defense several times, maintaining a distance between him and the mushroom hut. Now that he looked back, even the entrance that he had come from had become indistinct. The mud in the smelly swamp stirred, as if some strange monster was stirring restlessly below. The rugged ghost trees beside him also began to sway, baring their fangs and brandishing their claws, causing one's heart to palpitate. Feeling the trembling of Alice's small hands, Grimm smiled and said, "Are you afraid, Alice?" I'm not afraid," Alice still stubbornly said. "Do you think I don't know the traditions of witches?" "What traditions do witches have?" "Witches all believe in the Witch King, so they are not allowed to kill each other, or else they will be seen as a common enemy." "Oh, there's such a saying?" Grimm asked doubtfully. "Then if you accidentally fall into the poisonous pool and die, does it count as a direct murder?" "Of course it does. Otherwise, any witch can use this method to kill someone they don't like." As soon as Alice finished speaking, a dense white mist floated up from the pool beside her. It lingered around her and quickly condensed into a pale and ugly old woman's face in front of her. "Little one, don't be so full of yourself. You're not a real witch yet. Killing you is not a violation of a witch's oath." The old witch in the fog smiled faintly. "But I'm already a candidate for the Destiny Witch. If you kill me, doesn't that mean you have already participated in the selection of the Destiny Witch?" Although Alice looked young, she had a lot of knowledge, and the questions she asked were equally sharp. "Little one, you really have a sharp tongue." All right, for the sake of this little one, I'll make an exception and meet you. As soon as the old witch's voice fell, the smelly pool once again returned to its calm state. The ghost tree, which had no leaves on its trunk and only had withered and bony bark, began to slowly move its body to both sides of the road while making a shrill squeaking sound. The mushroom hut that had been looming in the distance strangely broke through the fog and appeared in front of them. Grim held Alice's hand and took a step forward, stepping on a gray lawn floating in the middle of the pool. The mushroom hut was located in the middle of the lawn. The lawn was not big, only about an acre in size. The mushroom hut was even more inconspicuous. It was only 5 meters high and had a radius of less than 5 meters. However, compared to the mushroom hut's insignificance, its simple and dilapidated appearance surprised Grim even more. Seriously speaking, this mushroom hut was more like a common dilapidated house in the slums. It was crooked, and the corners were covered with dense spider webs. The originally soft and glossy bacteria were now dark and dilapidated, as if they had lost their vitality. "Come in, you two. The two of you." An old and shrill voice came from inside the house. Grim gritted his teeth, bent down, and entered the mushroom hut with Alice. What surprised Grim was that the hut was not as narrow as he had imagined. Even with his height of 2 meters, he could still smoothly straighten his body, and there was still nearly half a meter of space between his head and the old ceiling. This mushroom hut had 2 floors. Through the huge gap between the old wooden boards, Grim could even see that the room above his head was a simple study. In the middle of the hut was a crooked pillar with a huge mold on it. In the corner of the house in the distance, above the blazing fire pit, a huge and ugly crucible was simmering an unknown green soup. Floating on top of it were terrifying white eyeballs, the arms of unknown creatures, or a human head without any flesh and blood. An indescribable pungent smell lingered in the hut, and Grim's face instantly turned green as soon as he took a whiff. Chapter 284. After swallowing 3 to 4 bottles of antidote, Grim was finally rid of the poison in his body. Originally, he was confident in his elemental body and was no longer afraid of poison. However, he could only hold his breath, not daring to breathe in any more air in the room. However, in contrast to Grim, Alice stood on her tiptoes and inhaled the wonderful smell with all her might, looking like a glutton who had encountered a top-notch delicacy. If not for Grim pulling her back, Alice might have already run to the crucible and gobbled it up. Grim quickly surveyed his surroundings. The entire room was filled with black iron hooks that hung from the roof. Below the hooks hung bottles of various sizes and colors. Every bottle was filled with a dark, turbid liquid, and within the liquid were the eyeballs of strange monsters. The eyeballs of these monsters were of different sizes, flat and round. Some even had long stalks that swam around in the containers. In the huge green bottle that was gently swaying in front of Grim was a giant's eyeball. The reason why it was called a giant's eyeball was because it took up almost all of the space in the green bottle that was a meter tall and half a meter wide. When Grim got closer to take a closer look, the huge eyeball even blinked strangely. Beep. Discovered the organ of a high-energy monster. Initial estimate. Rank 2. Can you identify what kind of creature's eyeball this is? Grim communicated with the AI chip. Beep. After searching and matching, estimated results are Cyclops 63%, Beholder 21%, Demonic Giant 4%. The remaining matches are less than 1%. Host, would you like to display all of them? No need. The Cyclops was a terrifying giant that possessed both physical and earth elemental strength. Compared to the hill giant that Grim and the rest had encountered in the dark forest, the Cyclops might not be as strong or large, but it had a strange petrifying ability. Hence, it was an extremely powerful rank 2 monster. Grim's gaze continued to wander, and finally found a messy wooden table in another corner of the room. There were overturned ink bottles, yellowed scrolls, open scrolls, and a slanted stack of books that almost reached the ceiling. And on this wooden table that was no different from a pile of junk, There was a strange witch with a stooped body and messy hair like a chicken's nest. She was not tall, perhaps even half a head shorter than Alice, and she had to stand on a high wooden stool to show herself from behind the table. She seemed to be wearing a black wizard's robe, but Grim wasn't too sure, because the wrinkled wizard robe was too dirty. It was covered with grease, ink, and unknown potions. The thick and greasy dust had completely covered the original color of the wizard robe, only revealing a trace of an exquisite and smooth witchcraft rune outlined by a golden thread at the corner. At first glance, Grim suspected that Loanna belonged to a branch of the Witches of Death, because in this place he saw too many things related to death. However, Alice, who had been holding his hand, secretly told him through the telepathic bond that this Loanna was actually a witch of despair, and her domain was hope and recovery. Well, although it was a little subversive, Grim could only silently accept it. Tell me why you're here. You're not the first one who dares to trespass into my dark swamp, but you're the first one to step into this place alive. If you can't give me a satisfactory reason, the old witch's wrinkled face revealed a sinister smile, revealing incomplete yellow teeth. But what scared Grim the most was her almost motionless dead fish eyes. Dear Lady Loanna, I'm here to buy a bottle of dead soul water. I heard that it's only available in your mushroom hut in the entire Sky City, so I had no choice but to come. In front of a crazy witch who was far more powerful than him, Grim could only tell the truth. Otherwise, who knew if these old guys had some disgusting witchcraft to verify the truth of his words? The dead soul water used to protect the departed soul from being harmed by foreign objects? The old witch stared at him with her dead fish eyes and asked coldly, "It seems like you've done your research before coming here. What do you plan to exchange for the dead soul water?" A top-grade night eye stone, a twig from the tree of life, and 100 grams of star sand from the void world. Grim did not dare to hesitate, and immediately took out the items he had prepared beforehand. Of course, these items were not from his collection, but from the Byron family. On the surface, the dead soul water belonged to the category of a level 2 mysterious item, and the market price should be within 7,000 magic crystals. The 3 items Grim took out were all worth more than 3,000 magic crystals, which was more than enough to exchange for the dead soul water. However, in the entire Sky City, only Lady Loanna could refine the dead soul water, so whether or not the transaction would go smoothly depended on her mood. Hence, after taking out 3 crystal boxes from his waist pouch and placing them on the wooden table, Grim held his breath and waited for the other party's reply. That's a fair price. But a sinister smile suddenly appeared on the old witch's face. I'm not in a good mood today, so I choose to reject your proposal. Grim was speechless. However, he did not have the guts to argue with a terrifying level 2 witch. Hey, old woman, don't go too far. Alice could not help but interrupt in dissatisfaction. The items we've taken out are far more valuable than your dead soul water. Do you have any reason not to sell it? Grim's expression changed, and he hurriedly pulled Alice behind him. My lady, the child is young and ignorant. Please don't blame her. What are you afraid of? Alice was still stubborn behind him. She's a witch, and I'm also a witch candidate. With our identities, she can't kill me. Why should I be afraid of her? Kakik. Interesting, very interesting. The old witch sneered again. It's been so many years, but this is the first time someone has dared to be so arrogant in front of me. Young man, I'll make an exception and give you a chance. As long as you transfer this little fellow's witchcraft contract to me, I'll give you a jar of dead soul water. How about it? Isn't this good enough? Alice, who was hiding behind Grim, trembled slightly and tightly grabbed his arm, not daring to speak again. Grim forced a smile and slowly began to retreat. Lady Loanna, this Alice is only a companion who accompanied me on my travels. Before he could finish, the old witch, Leona, stretched out her wrinkled right hand and grasped the void. Both of them felt a slight pain in their souls, and an illusory witchcraft contract appeared out of thin air, floating in the air. A slave contract. The old witch's dead fish eyes emitted a terrifying red light. How dare you? How dare you try to enslave a destiny witch candidate? Are you going to humiliate all the northern witches with this behavior? If you break the slave contract today and hand over this loser, I'll allow you to walk out of here alive and take the dead soul water with you. Otherwise, don't blame me for eliminating some losers on behalf of the entire witches community. As soon as the old witch's voice fell, the entire dark swamp suddenly trembled slightly. An even thicker fog began to rise, causing the already dim house to become even darker. Grim could feel that at this moment, the eyes of the monsters soaking in the jars and jars in the hut were strangely turning to look at him, and a terrifying feeling of impending death rose in his heart. Speak. Do you want to hand over the contract and leave with the dead soul water, or do you want to die here? Speak. The old witch's sharp and terrifying voice echoed in the silent hut, making one's hair stand on end. Clack, clack, clack. The faint sound of teeth chattering came from behind. Alice, who had always been fearless, finally felt fear. The hidden void began to tremble more and more frequently. Perhaps in a moment, Alice would be able to open a crack in space big enough for two people to pass through and escape from this place. Unfortunately, in front of a Grade 2 witch, there were no ifs in this world. The crack in space disappeared at the same time it appeared. With a muffled sound similar to a smelly fart, the black crack that had just opened turned into a puff of green smoke and dissipated before it could stabilize, leaving a green burn mark in the void. Now you want to escape? Hee. It's too late. The old witch pointed with her finger, and a ghostly face formed from gray smoke suddenly appeared beside Grim, sneering coldly as it disappeared into his body. In the next moment, Grim felt his body stiffen, and the inseparable fire elemental energy that was originally integrated with his mind was suddenly lost. It was as if he was suddenly placed in an anti-magic barrier, and there were no longer any fire elemental particles around him that he could control. Grim's tall body swayed a few times, and he almost fell down. After completing the elemental transformation, the fire elemental was him, and he was the fire elemental. At this moment, the connection between the fire elemental particles and his mind was suddenly blocked, and he almost lost the strength to support his body. Damn it, why does elemental transformation have such a drawback? Why have I never heard of this in any books? Is this the power of a high-grade wizard? To be able to cut off a low-grade wizard's connection to elemental particles? Without the fire elemental particles, Grim's strength was greatly reduced. He used his hand to hold on to the crooked pillar, and only then did he not fall to the ground. Asterisk sigh. Asterisk a strange sound was heard, and a black python as thick as a teacup slithered down the pillar and coiled around Grim's arm. The black triangular head of the snake was raised high, and it slowly approached Grim's face. When the snake hissed, Grim could already feel the fishy breath on his face. The old witch's voice sounded again. I'll give you one last chance to choose. Hand over the contract or... Chapter 285. Beep. Unknown force field detected. Host's spiritual perception is rapidly weakening. Beep. Detected a high-energy magic creature approaching. Dangerous aura. Host, please leave immediately. Beep. External spiritual pressure detected. Intimidating host. Host, please advise whether or not to counterattack. Beep. Discovered the old witch's death threat echoed in Grim's ears, and the chip in his mind beeped nonstop. The continuous warnings of danger almost drove him crazy. However, the more critical the situation was, the more focused and sensitive Grim's spiritual force became. Grim was surprised to find that the whole mushroom hut was covered in red through his element vision. All the red dots representing the enemies were connected together, but the old witch's short and stooped figure projected onto his retina was a big yellow dot. Red represented hostility, and the darker the color, the stronger the hostility. Green represented friendliness, while yellow represented neutrality, which meant that the target did not have any prejudice against him. How could this be possible? The old witch was so determined to force him into a corner, as if she was going to kill him the next moment. So how could he possibly remain neutral? Just as Grimm was bewildered and did not know what to do, the yellow representing the old, which turned from yellow to red and showed signs of turning red. It seemed that Grimm's hesitation had angered her, causing her to gradually show hostility. No, this old witch's goal was not so simple. When she found out that Alice had signed a slave contract with him, she did not seem to have much killing intent and remained neutral. However, when he was forced to hesitate, her murderous intent was aroused instead. Grimm's mind raced, and some of the traditions and secrets of the Witches of Despair quickly flashed through his mind. Grimm tried to probe. "If I give up this contract, will you let me go?" Although the old witch's ability was strange and could force a contract to appear, she could not change the content of the contract. After all, a contract was a basic rule protected by the laws of the plane. Unless the two parties who signed the contract were willing to give up the contract, it would be impossible to nullify an already effective contract. Otherwise, even a great wizard would not be able to override the laws of the plane to nullify or change the content of the contract. As soon as Grimm showed his intention to give up the contract, he could sense that the old witch had become a hot topic in his mind. "Very good, very good." The old witch's sharp voice suddenly softened. "You can now give up this contract. As long as this contract disappears, I'll stay, and you can take the soulless water with you." If not for the AI chip's meticulous detection ability, Grimm might have been deceived by the other party's facade. Although the old witch spoke nicely and even squeezed out an ugly smile, Grimm felt a chill in his heart. He instantly understood the other party's true position. Since he understood the other party's intentions, Grimm made his move without hesitation. "Yulrayar!" With a loud shout, Grimm made a grabbing motion with his left hand, and the secret voodoo poison scroll silently appeared in his hand. The thick spell book opened with a bang, and the sturdy vellum pages began to flip rapidly. Soon, it stopped on a certain page. Red light burst forth from the spell book, and the runes, marks, lines, and images on the page began to light up one by one. The image of a rolling fireball was quickly outlined in the air above the page. As the red light filled the air, the image of the fireball solidified and quickly turned into a terrifying fireball with a diameter of 1 meter. With the guidance of Grimm's spiritual force, the fireball immediately locked onto the sneering old witch and shot towards her. The distance between the two was less than 5 meters, and the fireball speed was incomparably fast. The moment it was activated, it had already reached the ugly witch. At the same time, Grimm waved his right hand and pushed Alice towards the door of the mushroom hut. He quickly and stealthily shouted, "You go first, I'll be right behind you." "Hurry!" Alice was obviously confused by the scene in front of her, as she turned around and ran towards the door in a daze. This series of actions seemed incomparably complicated, but in the eyes of the people present, it only took a few seconds. Magi had always been known for their spiritual force, and the activity and speed of their thoughts far exceeded that of ordinary people. Coupled with their meticulous spiritual perception, they had already thought of 7 or 8 thoughts in the time it took for others to be distracted, and they had also put them into action. Grimm used the AI chip to observe the old witch's reaction. There was a strong force field disturbance outside her body, and the AI chip could not pry in her body at all. However, when the other party's spiritual force completely suppressed Grimm's spiritual perception, the AI chip was able to quickly analyze the other party's basic intentions through the subtle changes in the surrounding spiritual force and elemental energy. This ability to investigate the minute details might not be very useful in an official battle. With the frightening abilities of the other party, Grimm might not be able to withstand any of the rank 2 spells. So what if he had analyzed the other party's intentions in advance? He could not block the attacks that he should not be able to block, and he could not dodge the attacks that he wanted to dodge. The difference in strength was obvious. His battle techniques and experience could only be used against opponents of the same rank. As for fighting someone of a higher rank, that was purely courting death, an act of suicide that brought about one's own destruction. Hence, Grimm used the AI chip to monitor the old witch's hostility, not because he wanted to fight her, but because he wanted to verify if his guess was correct. As expected, when Grimm courageously attacked her, the old witch Leona's hostility somehow faded a lot. When Grimm tried his best to protect Alice and leave, the old witch's hostility completely disappeared. She even changed her stance from neutral to friendly. Bingo, I made the right bet. Grimm's spirits rose, and he immediately turned and ran without hesitation. The stage had been set, and now it was time to see how the old witch would deal with it. A moment later, Grimm and Alice were brought back by the terrifying black python. What Grimm did not expect was that the terrifying black python was also a rank 2 magical creature, and it was the old witch Leona's pet. With a flick of its long, black tail, which was covered in black scales, extended over 10 meters, and easily wrapped around Grimm and Alice, who had lost the ability to cast spells. As for the fireball that Grimm had ignited using the secret scroll of voodoo poison, it was sucked into the black python's stomach. The fireball then exploded, and a faint black smoke came out of the black python's nostrils. After digesting the bursting fireball, the black python was completely unscathed. This caused Grimm's expression to change. The confidence Feng had built up after defeating the Tier 2 Radiant Knight in an otherworldly plane was instantly smashed to smithereens. Damn it, why was there such a huge difference between a rank 2 Magus from another plane and a rank 2 Magus from the Magus world? You're not bad. Kakik. The old witch's face revealed a rare and terrifying smile. You actually dared to attack a rank 2 Magus for this lass. No wonder this lass was willing to become your slave. Not bad, not bad. Grimm and Alice's faces were filled with confusion, as if they were confused by the scene in front of them. However, one was pretending, while the other was really confused. Seeing the two of them staring at her in confusion, the old witch Leona jumped off the tall wooden stool with difficulty and walked to the front of the wooden table. She held her staff in one hand and a corner of her black robe in the other. She squinted her eyes and looked at the two of them again, before nodding in satisfaction. I know you're full of doubts, but I don't have time to explain anything to you. Hey kid, your little maid needs to stay with me for 10 days. After 10 days, you can come and take her away. Before that, I need to teach her how to be a real witch, and you can leave. As Leona's staff trembled, Grimm saw a flash in front of him. In the next second, he found himself standing alone at the entrance of the dark swamp. He was holding a black clay pot in his arms. Grimm raised his head and looked at the dark swamp where the fog was getting thicker and thicker, making it difficult to distinguish the scenery inside. His eyes revealed a complicated expression. After a while, he finally shook his head and left. 7 days later, Gully 8 Arena. As a specialized arena for arcane sorcerers, Gully 8 was famous in the Outer Ring. Many arcane sorcerers who encounter disputes also like to come here to resolve their conflicts by means of competition. Today, the Byron family from the scattered Tarandagon region and the Greto family from the northern part of the Silver Alliance would decide their residency rights through a magic puppet battle. If the Greto family won, it would mean that the Byron family would lose their last foothold in Sky City and would no longer be able to participate in the internal resource purchasing rights of the Silver Alliance. If the Byron family won, as the challenger, the Greto family would have to pay a large amount of resources. It was said that the amount of resources they would have to pay was enough to empty a small family treasury. Hence, this magic puppet battle attracted the attention of many shopkeepers and sorcerers stationed there. Chapter 286. Ring-shaped stands, a large oval battle space, indestructible energy barriers, and fanatical spectators. The Gully 8 Colosseum was no different from the ancient Colosseum in Grimm's memory in terms of architecture and exterior design. Hence, when Grimm and the Byron family magi slowly walked into the arena, The entire arena was deathly silent. All the wizards and acolytes sat quietly in their seats and looked at them with indecipherable gazes. After seeing Grimm, some of the magi on the stands who were familiar with him could not help but gather together and whisper to each other. Their lips moved slightly, but not a single sound came out. It was obvious that they were communicating through communication spells. Don't be nervous. The Byron family will deal with all the dirty tricks. You just need to do your best to defeat them. Magus nunnally gritted her teeth and transmitted to Grimm. Remember, you must win. Although she knew that this would put extra pressure on Grimm, the Byron family had no other way out now. Hence, after Nunnally gave Grimm a pep talk, she quietly sat down and did not say another word. Angus smiled awkwardly and gave Grimm an indecipherable look, but he didn't say anything. The arena had a diameter of 1 mile, and the ground had been hardened to a certain extent. It was more than enough for 2 magic puppets to fight inside. There were about 200 seats in the arena, and all of them were occupied. There were about 40 to 50 magi, and the rest were elite acolytes sent by various families. Just as Grimm was calmly looking around, the arena suddenly became restless. It's here! It's here! Look, that fellow is here again. This time, we can see the magic puppet knight killing everyone. For a moment, the arena was in an uproar, and discussions were everywhere. Grimm retracted his gaze and turned his head, just in time to see a tall and mighty metal puppet following behind a group of magi into the arena. Before the group even got close, the heavy footsteps of the metal puppet and the unique sound of gears grinding against each other could be heard. There were as many as 7 magi, both male and female. They all wore a family crest with a roaring bear's head on their chests. They were magi from the Greto family. At the very front was a bald, brawny man wearing thick copper armor. As a rank 2 wizard and the leader of the Greto family, he locked eyes with Wizard Nunnally as soon as he walked into the arena. There was a deep hatred in his eyes. Grimm couldn't help but suspect that there were other conflicts between the 2 families apart from the battle between the battle dolls. But at this moment, there was no room for retreat for either side. Therefore, Grimm abandoned all thoughts that he shouldn't have and shifted his attention to his opponent, the puppet master and his marionette knight. Grimm's gaze swept across the 7 magi, and he quickly found the puppet master. Of course, this wasn't because Puppeteer was different from other wizards. It was because the Byron family had given him a holographic image of Puppeteer. The puppet master was not very tall, and the puppet was a wretched old man with a white goatee. Grimm checked his aura and found that he was not much stronger than Grimm. Grimm estimated that his spiritual force did not exceed 10 points. Otherwise, he would not have been able to detect the strength of his aura. After some time, Grimm had gained a basic understanding of the Tier 1 sorcerers. As long as one could successfully condense a wizard heart core and comprehend the power of the plane's laws, they would officially become a magus. Under normal circumstances, a newly promoted magus would only have 1 point of spiritual force, and the basic requirement to become a rank 2 magus was to have 21 points of spiritual force. Therefore, a peak rank 1 magus would only have 20 points of spiritual force. A peak rank 1 magus would have 20 points of spiritual force, while a newly promoted magus would have 1 point of spiritual force. Although the difference in spiritual force between the 2 sides could not be determined, the difference in strength between the 2 sides was obvious. For a rank 1 magus, 10 points of spiritual force was the threshold. Once this threshold was crossed, one could be called an elite magus. If one could not cross this threshold, they would always be considered noob. For example, Wizard Anderson, who had died in Grimm's hands, had advanced for more than 300 years, but he still could not cross the threshold of 10 points of spiritual force. This kind of person with no potential could only be called a veteran magus. He did not have the qualifications to be called an elite. It had to be said that almost 60% of the rank 1 magi in the magus continent could not cross this threshold in their lifetime. As for puppet master Runo from the Greto family, he had already burned more than half of his life, but his spiritual force was still at the level of an official magus. From this, it could be seen that he did not have the ability to become a rank 2 magus. It could be said that this was an awkward reality that arcane magi could not avoid. Too much time was spent searching for better magic gold formulas, searching for ideal rare metals, constantly improving and optimizing puppet spell formations, and painstakingly creating one's own ultimate magic puppet. Each of these items, each one of them, took an arcane sorcerer's time to complete. If all of this time was added together, it would quickly burn away the glorious and great life of an arcane magus. Therefore, generally speaking, there were very few rank 3 or 4 high-ranking magi among the arcane magi, and rank 5 and above great magi were even rarer. Even among the high-ranking magi and great magi of the Silver Alliance, very few of them had advanced through their own hard work. Most of them had made outstanding contributions and were nurtured by the Silver Alliance without sparing any resources. That was how they got to where they were. These people were called the chosen ones among the arcane magi. Therefore, for those with average talent, if they knew that they had no hope of advancing, it would be better for them to devote themselves to being an arcane magus. This way, if they were to come up with any groundbreaking new knowledge or a new route in the arcane path, they might be noticed by the Silver Alliance and become a chosen one. Unfortunately, this puppet master Runo was obviously not someone with outstanding potential, nor did he have the qualifications to become a chosen one. Therefore, his strength was neither strong nor weak, and he seemed to be weaker than Grim. However, today's competition was the combat power of the magic puppet, not the puppet master. Therefore, Grim glanced at Runo and focused his attention on the metal magic puppet behind him. This was a metal magic puppet that was sculpted to look like a human knight. It had silver-white metal armor, a full metal helmet, and a huge sword and shield on its back. Although it could not walk as nimbly as a human, it was still much smoother and more agile than a normal magic puppet. Seeing that the two families who had applied for the duel had arrived, the silver sorcerer who had been waiting at the side finally opened his mouth. "Since you are all here, let the arcane magus of your choice enter the stage. Remember, the most important rule of the arcane competition is that magi are not allowed to attack their opponents directly. They are only allowed to use their own magic puppets and magic puppets to fight. Anyone who breaks the rules of the competition will be disqualified. Hence, please be cautious when using your magic. All right, let's enter." Although this Silver Magus was only a rank 1, he represented the Silver Alliance. Therefore, even the rank 2 magi of the two families did not dare to underestimate him. Grim and Runo quickly stepped forward and stood in front of the Silver Magus. The Silver Magus's gaze fell on the magic puppet knight, and his face revealed an expression of admiration. However, when he looked at Grim, he could not help but be slightly stunned. "You're Grim, and you represent the Byron family? Where's your magic puppet?" Grim took out a summoning crystal from his waist pouch and tossed it lightly. With a bang, the flames exploded, and a tall and mighty giant was born from the flames. It stood silently in place. Elemental puppet. He actually used an elemental puppet to fight against a magic puppet. The Byron family must be crazy. Yes. Don't the Byron family have any common sense? Using an elemental puppet to fight against a magic puppet is really disadvantageous. The clamor immediately rose and poured into the ears of the people from the Byron family from all directions. Magus Nunnally's cold spiritual force circled around the arena, and the clamor of discussions instantly disappeared. No matter where one was, a Tier 2 Magus was worthy of respect. At the very least, before humiliating the Byron family, they had to consider whether they could afford to anger a Tier 2 Magus. Everyone could see it clearly. The Magus representing the Byron family was obviously an elemental Magus, and he had brought an elemental puppet to participate in the battle. Either of these two factors indicated that they had lost their advantage in the battle. With these two factors added together, it was likely that they would lose without a doubt. So what if an elemental magus was powerful? In the arcane competition, magi were not allowed to attack anyone other than their magic puppet. Otherwise, the powerful combat power of an elemental magus would be wasted. Moreover, the elemental puppet's body was too weak, and it could not withstand the magic puppet's reinforced iron bones. Hence, the outcome of today's battle was already decided. The silver magus could not help but shake his head and sigh. He waved his hand and signaled for the two to enter the arena. Runo led the magic puppet knight, while Grim led the inferno tyrant. Both parties entered the arena through a light screen that was temporarily opened. As the light screen gradually disappeared, the arena once again became a closed space. Looking out from the inside, all one could see was a gray light screen that completely covered the area. Meanwhile, the scenery outside was completely replaced by a hazy fog. No one could see anything, and no sound could be heard. It seemed like this was also a setup to prevent the outside world from interfering with the battle. Grim brought the Inferno Tyrant to the side of the light screen and stood still. When he turned around, he just happened to see Runo's sinister sneer. "Kid, just admit defeat. Otherwise, don't be heartbroken when your puppet is torn to pieces later." Grim shook his head and laughed. He could not be bothered with this guy who was about to be defeated. "I declare that the battle begins now." The voice of the silver magus suddenly sounded in the arena. Chapter 287. His vision dimmed for 2 seconds. When Grim's consciousness regained clarity, he was already in a sea of red flames. No, it was not that his body had been thrown into the flames, but rather, his consciousness had been replaced by the Inferno Tyrant's core, and he had truly become Inferno Tyrant. The moment his consciousness was fully awake, the AI chip's unique, crisp mechanical voice sounded in his mind once again. Beep. Spiritual transfer complete. Connection is stable. Consciousness transfer complete. Origin elemental compatibility. All indicators have reached the expected targets. Requesting host's instructions to begin controlling the body. Also, host attention. There is a limit to the amount of soulless water that can protect and transfer the consciousness. Estimated duration is 2 hours, 17 minutes, 39 seconds. Beginning countdown. Following the AI chip's prompt, a large light screen and numbers were projected in his mind, showing the countdown to the soulless water's effects. Take full control of this body and prepare for battle, Grim replied calmly. Following the rapid adjustment of the frequency of his spiritual force, Grim finally saw the scene in front of him clearly. At this moment, Grim was no longer in his original body. Instead, he had completely transferred his consciousness into the core of the Inferno Tyrant's control. When a human soul lost the nourishment of flesh and blood, it would weaken and wither the moment it left its original body. Grim was anxious to obtain the soulless water in order to protect his soul from being dragged down by the cold crystal core, and thus affect this crucial battle. The moment he transferred over, all Grim could see, hear, and smell was fiery red. Apart from that, he could not see, hear, or smell anything. It was only after he successfully adjusted the frequency of his spiritual force that he was able to see things again. The Inferno Tyrant was an elemental puppet. The way it saw, heard, and smelled was very different from that of humans. Although it had human-like eyes, ears, a mouth, and a nose, they were all simulated by flames. The only way it could sense the outside world was through its spirit. So why did a cold metal puppet need to have the spirit attribute? That was because the spirit attribute was the only way it could sense the outside world, judge friend from foe, and carry out the orders of its creator. Without the spirit attribute, the metal marionette would become blind and deaf, unable to hear or see. Grim's human body was suddenly projected into an elemental body. Without the familiar eyes, ears, mouth, and nose, he could only rely on his powerful mental perception to see what was happening outside. Grim's spiritual feelers extended out from the core that controlled the Inferno Tyrant's heart. Then, he followed the elemental energy network in the Inferno Tyrant's body and projected his feelers out from the fiery red eye sockets on his head. Wherever his spiritual tentacles reached, all matter would appear in the form of their own origin. In Grimm's mind, a world that had lost color, touch, taste, and temperature appeared in front of him in a different form. He saw the floor under his feet, the various elemental particles in the air, and the enemy that was waiting for him in the distance, the magic puppet knight. A dense, intense fluorescent light enveloped the body of the magic puppet knight. The powerful energy radiated dazzling colors, blocking Grimm's spiritual feelers from penetrating it. However, with the powerful energy analysis ability of elemental vision and the AI chip's meticulous data collection ability, the body of the magic puppet knight in the distance gradually became translucent. Some of the energy channels that flowed in the runic circuits also became faintly visible. Bright torrents of energy flowed in the densely packed runic circuits. They flowed continuously, supplying the powerful energy needs of every part of the metal puppet's body. In some key parts of the body, there were also some small energy centers that were also operating at the same time. They were both energy generators and energy storage centers. The bright yellow, pure energy surged in these artificial blood vessels, which enabled the magic puppet knights to unleash their terrifying combat ability. The main energy center of the magic puppet knight was slightly lower in the middle of its chest, and the control center of its consciousness was located in the human heart. It was protected by the thickest metal armor. It was destined to be a difficult task for outsiders to destroy it through physical attacks and spells. However, no matter how difficult the task was, someone had to do it. Grimm's consciousness moved slightly, and the tall Inferno Tyrant took 2 steps forward. He clenched his huge fists of flames, bent his body, and roared at the magic puppet knight in the distance. When Grimm finished his battle preparations, Runo, who was in the distance, had already given a series of battle orders to the magic puppet knight in front of him. He then slapped the cold and hard back of the magic puppet knight and shouted excitedly, "Fight, my brave warrior! Defeat the enemy and tear that flaming man to pieces." Amidst Runo's excited shouts, the marionette knight reached out and grabbed the huge tower shield and knight's greatsword in his hands. Then, like a real human knight, he lowered his body and launched a swift and violent charge at the Inferno Tyrant. A 3-meter-tall metal magic puppet and a 4-meter-tall flaming puppet charged at the same time. The violent aura that could topple mountains and overturn the seas instantly ignited the atmosphere in the arena. Even in the spectators' stands, many Magus acolytes were excitedly clenching their fists and gritting their teeth, waiting for the fiery scene of Mars colliding with Earth to appear. Both parties were rapidly approaching each other. The Inferno Tyrant, who was proficient in elemental energy, charged forward while extending his large hand. A series of exploding fireballs shot at the charging magic puppet knight like a cannon. Each of these fireballs was the size of a wash basin, and the core temperature was more than 2,000 degrees. They were still flying in midair, but the void that they passed through was already distorted by the heat, and the scene was blurry. The magic puppet knight raised a huge metal tower shield in its left hand, like a warrior going against the wind. It forcefully withstood the fireballs that exploded on the surface of the shield, and still charged at the Inferno Tyrant with all its might. Bang, bang, bang. A series of exploding fireballs exploded, forming a violent and ferocious flame shockwave that washed the void between the two people over and over again. The broken pieces of the fireballs fell on the stone slabs that had been hardened by witchcraft, and they still persistently burned. Dong, dong, dong. A series of muffled sounds could be heard. The magic puppet knight's huge metal feet stepped on the sea of fire, forcefully withstanding the violent firestorm, and rushed to the front of the Inferno Tyrant in one breath. In the next second, a sharp and dazzling greatsword light flashed, and the Inferno Tyrant was chopped into a sky full of flame fragments. There was a soft sound of flames. The Inferno Tyrant that Grimm was controlling appeared behind the magic puppet knight's body. Looking at his opponent, who was still maintaining the posture of swinging his sword down 100 meters away, the Inferno Tyrant's huge lava hand, which was surrounded by flames, held it up gently. A violent lava fireball quickly condensed and formed in the time it took to snap a finger. With a light shake of his hand, he threw this fortified lava fireball at the back of the magic puppet knight. The Inferno Tyrant took a step back and grabbed at the air with both hands. Lines upon lines of flame, spears quickly formed, and then he threw them at his opponent with all his might. Under Runo's remote control, the magic puppet knight quickly redetermined the Inferno Tyrant's position. It turned around and used its tower shield to block the continuous stream of flame spears, and waved the knight's great sword as it slowly approached its opponent. Taking advantage of the opportunity when the two big puppets were entangled in battle, Runo raised his head and looked at Grim, who was standing motionless at the edge of the arena in the distance. He laughed coldly in his heart. Transfer of consciousness. Haha. Although this will make your puppet a little more agile, if you lose the battle and the puppet's crystal core that you entrust your consciousness to is destroyed, your consciousness will also suffer a strong backlash. For a new sorcerer like you, if it's light, your spiritual power will shrink, and if it's heavy, your consciousness will become scattered, and you'll become a lunatic. What an ignorant young man. Let me teach you a lesson that you'll never forget for the rest of your life. When Grim once again used Flame Leap to increase the distance between him and the magic puppet knight, the guy who had been acting rather clumsy all this while turned around and quickly captured the position of the Inferno Tyrant. Then, a large amount of energy jets suddenly appeared behind him. Using the counterforce formed by the energy jets, the magic puppet knight's clumsy body suddenly became as fast as flying. His entire body was like a cannonball, plowing two deep grooves on the ground, and almost in the blink of an eye, he closed in on the Inferno Tyrant. 5 meters. It could be said with certainty that this was the first time since the start of the battle that two different types of puppets were so close to each other. In the next instant, the magic puppet knight put his giant shield back on his back, raised his knight's greatsword, and launched the most ferocious attack at the Inferno Tyrant. Grim was slowly retreating. As he retreated, he controlled the ferocious flames to burn his opponent's steel body. While attacking his opponent, he was also continuously dodging those lightning-fast, storm-like intensive attacks. If it were another magic puppet, perhaps he could rely on his rock-solid steel body to fight the magic puppet knight head-on. However, the Inferno Tyrant only had an elemental body. No matter how strong his body, which was condensed from fire elements, was, in the end, unable to compete with his opponent's steel body, which was made of real gold and silver. Almost in an instant, the Inferno Tyrant's body, which was condensed from flames, was damaged by January 10th. The extreme flames and terrifyingly high temperature that gushed out of the Inferno Tyrant's body had also roasted the magic puppet knight's body to the point where it softened a little. Some of the patterns and exquisite patterns on the edges had already become a mess. However, with the magic puppet knight's metal body that was as thick as 4 fingers, in addition to the magic iron alloy's decent elemental resistance, if the Inferno Tyrant wanted to use flame spray to corrode through its armor, he would probably not be able to do so without at least a quarter of an hour. Chapter 288. The raging flames spread like a sea. 2 tall figures fought with all their might in the middle of a sea of fire. Although both of them were wizard puppets without any flesh, the intensity of the battle was enough to make people excited and unable to control their emotions. The magic puppet knight was obviously a close combat puppet, although it also had some semi-long-range attack abilities. When faced with a powerful opponent like the Inferno Tyrant, it would still be more effective if it used its fists to hit the flesh and blades to the bone. In order to prevent the opponent from escaping its attack range with Flame Leap again, the magic puppet knight gave up on its tower shield for defense. Instead, it brandished its sword and circled around the Inferno Tyrant. Every time the Inferno Tyrant wanted to jump away, it would be interrupted by the raging sword skills. It could only stay where it was and become a target for the opponent's continuous attacks. The left forearm wrapped in flames was chopped off, then regenerated. The 2 thick legs under were chopped off, then regenerated. The right shoulder was pierced into a hole in the front and back, then regenerated. The Inferno Tyrant had become a loyal training target. Its tall body of flames was chopped by the knight's sword, and sparks flew everywhere. However, the Inferno Tyrant was indeed a terrifying monster born from flames. The chopped-off arm fell to the ground and became a raging flame, while the broken legs suddenly exploded into a sea of fire. Even though it was chopped to pieces, what flowed out of its body was not only hot lava, but also terrifying flames. However, the Inferno Tyrant was indeed a terrifying demon that was born from flames. The arms that had been chopped off fell onto the ground and turned into raging flames, while his legs that had been chopped off suddenly exploded into a sea of fire. Even though he had been chopped until there was not a single piece of skin left unscathed, what flowed out of his body other than scorching lava was still terrifying flames. Fire. Flames that filled the sky. The extreme flames that could burn without any fuel, coupled with the Inferno Tyrant's protective flame barrier, turned the entire battlefield within 100 meters into a world of black-red lava. The originally hard stone floor was roasted into slowly flowing, viscous lava. The temperature of the air in the field rose rapidly due to the heat. Within 10 meters of the two wizard puppets, the temperature of the air had already reached a shocking 7,000 degrees. In such a terrifying temperature, anything that was not protected by the spell would be vaporized. Even the floor under their feet that was protected by the spell formation could not withstand such a high temperature, and had already become a semi-molten liquid. Thus, the two big fellows were practically fighting in a sea of lava and flames. With Grim and the AI Chip controlling the Inferno Tyrant at the same time, it could have broken free from the Puppet Knight's control long ago. However, for the sake of victory, Grim still gritted his teeth and controlled the Inferno Tyrant to keep pestering the Puppet Knight. Yes, at this point, it was hard to tell who was in control of who. The Magic Puppet Knight was slashing valiantly. Every time it waved its long sword and hammered its giant fists, it could bring a heavy blow to the Inferno Tyrant's body of flames. Perhaps the body that had fallen off could be replenished with the fire element reserves in the crystal core, but the fire energy that had been lost was real and hard to replenish once it dissipated into the void. The reason why the Inferno Tyrant was able to form his own home ground so quickly was actually because he relied on this part of the fire element energy that was quickly being consumed. During this time, Grim's Flame Tyrant was only focused on one thing. That was to focus the flames on the right knee joint of the Marionette Knight. He planned to use the terrifying and pure light of the flames to melt the metal at the joints of the Marionette Knight's knee joint, distorting it and melting it, thus weakening the opponent's mobility. It could be seen that when this Marionette Knight was created, in order to give it more nimble movements and make it easier to use some powerful knight battle techniques, Runo had used a humanoid design. Although this allowed the Marionette Knight to be far more nimble than normal metal marionettes, it inevitably had the flaws of a human. The joints of the Marionette Knight's limbs were its greatest weakness. The energy center and control center were hidden in the thick chest, which was also the place with the tightest defense. It was very difficult for outsiders to penetrate the defense of the anti-magic tower shield and the knight's sword to attack there. Thus, Grim had to settle for the next best thing, and instead focused on attacking the joints of the Marionette Knight's lower limbs. Although it was still made of the Mandisur alloy, which was excellent in both physical and magical defense, it was the same excellent metal that was used for the anti-magic tower shield. However, even the best metal had its limits. Against a top-notch magic puppet like the Inferno Tyrant, coupled with the terrifying heat brought about by the light of the flames, even if the Marionette Knight had consciously protected its joints, it still could not stop Grim's determination and madness. Thus, when the two separated again after a quarter of an arduous battle, they were both riddled with injuries, and it was difficult for them to continue. The Inferno Tyrant had already lost 46% of its energy reserves, and some parts of its body had been destroyed by the opponent more than 10 times. However, under the meticulous detection and guidance of the AI. Chip, it was only injured and not killed, and the magic puppet crystal core in its body was still perfectly protected. Thus, when the two separated, the extremely miserable-looking Inferno Tyrant only used 7% of its energy reserves to repair its body. The marionette knight, opposite him, was still full of vigor. It had just trudged out of the lava pool with difficulty, and it once again waved its sword and pounced at the Inferno Tyrant. Thus, the second fierce battle quickly erupted on a new battlefield. The surrounding magi and acolytes watched the battlefield silently. Everyone had solemn expressions, and for the first time, they lost their confidence in this battle between elemental puppets and metal war puppets. This was because they could clearly see that when the marionette knight charged at the terrifying fire puppet for the second time, its right leg was no longer as nimble as before. Runo, who had been watching the battle from afar, was completely stunned. The battle that he had expected should not have turned out like this. As a marionette master, he was all too clear about the strengths and weaknesses of metal war puppets. Most metal war puppets were built with magic iron alloys that were outstanding in physical defense and had a certain degree of resistance to magic. Thus, they had the best defense against stabbing weapons such as swords and spears. However, these kinds of war puppets were more afraid of heavy weapons such as war hammers, flails, and giant axes for a long period of time. This was because the heavy hacking and hammering could easily damage spell formations and runic circuits that were heavily protected. Thus, ordinary magic puppets will be built as thick and round as possible, using a thick metal shell and terrifying weight to avoid being damaged by heavy weapons. As for the marionette knight that he had created, he had used the rare Mandasurian alloy shield and magic greatsword, as well as a high-grade knight's war soul. Thus, in order to maximize the combat power of the knight's war soul, the marionette knight had a slender body shape of an agile warrior. As for the defense of an agile warrior, a sturdy tower shield could make up for it. Thus, this marionette knight had the high attack power of an agile warrior and the high defense of a shield warrior. With this high defense and high attack power, as well as the combat skills of the knight's war soul, this marionette knight was so powerful that it had defeated the puppet runes sent by 2 trading companies. However, he had never expected that his marionette knight would encounter an even stronger elemental puppet here today. Under the precise command of the puppeteer, the opponent's elemental puppets displayed unimaginably terrifying combat power in close combat. One was a metal marionette with a body of steel, while the other was an elemental puppet covered in flames. In close combat, the marionette knight did not have much of an advantage. Just now, Runo had seen very clearly that the powerful combat skills that the marionette knight had used were all dodged in advance by the fireman. Even those attacks that were difficult to dodge were negated by the damage to its body, and it did not display its true power at all. Meanwhile, the fireman's attacks were as firm and persistent as ever, attacking the marionette knight's leg joints to weaken its mobility. Therefore, every time the 2 big guys came together and fought until the earth shook and the earth turned upside down, Runo's heart would burn with anxiety as if it was on fire. In the beginning, he could still insist on not getting involved in the close combat between the marionette knight and the Inferno Tyrant. After all, the knight's war soul that had been integrated into the marionette knight knew more about combat than he did. However, when he saw the terrifying fireman once again draw out the marionette knight's greatsword at the cost of a large area of its body, and then cause minor damage to the marionette's leg joints, Runo was furious. Damn it, this bastard opponent could even deceive the marionette knight's combat instincts. Marionette knights in close combat often faced such a choice: to continue attacking and continue to cause more damage to the opponent, or to choose to defend and prevent the opponent from continuing to attack their legs. However, the terrifying fireman would always give the best opportunity to attack, thus luring the marionette knight to attack itself. And it would take advantage of the opportunity when the opponent was busy attacking to slowly destroy the marionette knight's leg joints bit by bit. After all, the marionette knight was only a rigid, fused soul. Once it determined that the damage caused to the opponent by its attacks was far greater than the minor damage it suffered, it would attack without a care. And this was precisely used by the damned fireman. The opponent was using a large amount of energy consumption in exchange for the insignificant damage on the marionette knight's body. However, the location of the damage was a little special, and they were all concentrated on the marionette knight's right leg joints. Once he understood this, Runo no longer dared to let the marionette knight rely on its instincts to fight. Instead, he forcefully ordered it to first choose to defend or dodge when its legs were attacked. Unfortunately, at this moment, the Inferno Tyrant had already chosen to attack. The scene in front of him shook violently. The chip in his mind was already beeping with intense alarms. Beep, warning, warning. Energy reserves have been depleted by 78%. Estimated battle duration, 25 minutes, 17 seconds. Grimm had already made the Inferno Tyrant pay a heavy price in order to cripple one of his opponent's legs. Unfortunately, even though most of the energy had been depleted, the opponent was still only injured and not crippled. He still maintained his powerful mobility and attack power. Moreover, under the command of the Marionette Knight, the Marionette Knight had already become more and more cautious, leaving less and less opportunities for the Inferno Tyrant to attack. If this went on, the opponent only needed to rely on defense and counterattack to be able to exhaust the Inferno Tyrant to death. You're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.